All right. I do believe that we are finally
That's
live.
pretty funny.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Break the Rules. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, LevPo on Twitter, and it is a great pleasure to have this another reverse debate with Aella Girl, and Giovanni Panicietti, the great
Yes.
Giovanni Panicietti, Bella. So I just wanted to
Oh,
say first off that I am incredibly grateful for Aella to come here and talk about this with us. This is something that I really appreciate people reaching out, regardless of however differently people see things, and try to see what it is like to be in another's shoes. At the same time, if we are talking about something like women's rights, I think everybody here is, in the sense for women's rights, and we all have mothers. We all have, well, not all of us have sisters, but, mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, whatever. The
Hey,
point
fellas.
is that
Lev,
we have
Lev,
so many
please.
influential women in our lives, and we would never want anything bad to happen to them at all. And I am completely for women's rights personally, and yeah, you get the idea. The point is that we want to see what it's like to push back on some of the things that have been happening in our modern condition. And I think that with the subject of something like women's rights, it could bring up some interesting things. So here we go. I'm really excited about this. It's going to be a really fun show. And before we go on, Ayla, can you in brief state a little bit about yourself, how you got into the pornography business, the OnlyFans business? I'm not really sure what is the best ways to categorize it. So go for it, Ayla.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to categorize myself either. I got into sex work almost a decade ago when I was sleeping on a friend's couch and uneducated and had just quit working at a factory. I was like, I need money really bad and I don't want to work at a factory anymore. So I started getting naked online, and then people gave me money for that. And then one thing led to another. And now I'm very successful on OnlyFans and getting invited on podcasts to do weird shit like this, which is nice.
Well, I appreciate you coming in. And, well, you know what? Let's get right down to it. I have a poll that has already been filled up. You motherfuckers started filling up this poll before the show even started. But basically, the poll is whether Geo won arguing on behalf of women's rights or whether Ayla won arguing against women's
Implying that
rights.
I don't
So,
believe in
Biased.
women's rights.
It's clearly
I
very
don't.
biased already.
well,
Oh,
Geo, you don't believe in any rights whatsoever, right?
well, I
Or
guess we could start on that, but let me just really quickly let me ask Aella, just as an introduction, what is your relation to you consider yourself what do they call it, a rationalist or a neo rad, or what is your the online community that you come from? First of all, are you were you a rationalist, like the less wrong, big yud type of people, or
Yeah, I've been in the rationalist community for about 6 years now and have lived in group houses, and they've been my primary IRL friend group. I also deviate from them in a lot of like kinds of styles or things they believe. So I have a great deal of affection for them, but I'm not sure that like I would consider myself an example of a classic rationalist.
all right?
where would you say you differ, before we go on, where would you say you differ from the classic Slater Star Codex, as I like to call it, rationalists?
Um, Probably I don't think that like I don't think that reality is made out of atoms, or at least like I don't think this is an internally consistent viewpoint to hold if we want to like describe things like consciousness.
So you see things more from a perspective of how do you call it? Like there is consciousness in everything, and that we are all one. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm more of like a classic hippie, like took too much acid kind of person in that regard. I think I can like kind of make sense whatever this means, but it's sort of like self-defeating, right? Like in order to make something make sense, you have to sort of describe it very well. And there's something about the thing that I'm attempting to describe that like is about the description itself, which makes it very hard and kind of a long discussion.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah,
almost like a noumenal distinction in some ways.
and I think in that sense, before we even go any further, Geo is pretty similar. Like the first time that I met Geo, one of the things that we were talking about was Jung's archetypes and all these things related to what exactly is all this that we are in right now. as far as, what are we? Where do we come from? Because I also don't believe that it's just an accident, that there's just a bunch of atoms, whatever. So anyway, without further ado, Aella, I would love for you to present your first argument here against women's rights.
You can just say, oh.
You got to start somewhere.
Wait,
Yeah.
well, to clarify, so Gio, you generally don't believe that women should have rights. Is this an accurate summary of your position?
No.
Like your actual position?
No.
No. I go ahead, Bruce. What were you gonna say?
I'm more of like the there's no rights, but I'm here kind of as like, in between. He's just rights don't exist in general.
I don't. Someone asked if I'm an egoist. I'm not an egoist. I'm in the chat. I'm not. I think maybe let me just, because I'm the pro side, so I might as well.
Yes. Well, while you're thinking, also, all the new people who are here, subscribe right now to Break the
Please.
Rules. We are the greatest, most underrated podcast in history. Aella, forget Unheard. You came to the right place over here with Break the Rules because we are
That was
breaking
a
new
good
ground.
interview.
Yes, that was a good interview, I gotta say. But we are breaking new ground by having this meeting of the minds that normally do not ever take place, which is why, again,
Yes.
I'm very grateful for you coming on.
So I don't I'm a woman respecter, because I have right next to me the great work that informs a lot of my thinking, Sexual Persona by Camille Paglia.
HDF.
And we also have another good friend who is also a woman, by the way,
Yes.
default friend. So
Default
I'm
friend.
a total women respecter. No, I mean I'm not being facetious. I don't believe in the modern liberal conception of rights-based ethics. I believe that they are severely limited. So liberal humanism in that sense, social contract theory, I very much am critical of it from I don't know what you would call it. I guess, for lack of a better term, reactionary perspective. I believe that they do not serve the subject. But to really begin, I think if we're going to talk about women's rights specifically, I think a good place to start from that framework would be just to clarify that I don't like to think of myself as some kind of, I guess maybe I am incel, MGTOW, no hymen, no diamond, women disrespect. No, I'm kidding. But I guess to defend the point, maybe I have to bracket my criticism of the rights-based model, but specifically when it comes to women's rights. Okay, so let's frame it from the classic, Rawls, Martha Nussbaum type of approach, which is throughout history, there is a sort of form of full freedom in terms of one's being that is granted to the male subject and denied to the female subject. Therefore, in order for, and this is also, if you read de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, this is very much the existential argument of women have not realized their full potential because there are various forces of not just oppression, but also the exclusion of the female embodiment and subjectivity in general. So, for example, in psychoanalysis, it's very much viewed from the male, or at least it was very much viewed from the male perspective, and therefore there is a deficit with which women experience their identity, not just solely as woman qua the male experience, but woman qua woman. So, for example, if we want to bring in human rights or women's rights, therefore it is a corrective measure of that sort of, whether it's a force of nature or patriarchy or so forth, that natural deficit that is occurring throughout the world. But there's not an easy way to codify that sort of recognition of femininity. Therefore, we need a sort of impersonal metric, such as human rights, such as women's rights, in order to fill the gaps within the sort of half of the world, I think statistically a bit more of the world's population, from experiencing a fuller sense of self. And also, if we're going to talk about liberal humanism and human rights, then therefore it's more advantageous within a market society for women to experience a full egalitarian sense of subjectivity and capacities within society to operate. So that is my, I hope I'm not being totally uncharitable to the women's rights argument. I mean, I again, like I say, the debate itself is kind of, I don't know. I'm trying to weasel my way out of not. I certainly do not. I don't know. I'm certainly not reading. I don't know Chateau Hertis before this debate, but yeah. So that's my basic outline, and I'm curious to hear your perspective, Aella, from Sorry, yeah. Sorry if I'm coming off as nervous. I'm kind of
No,
yeah.
you're good. We got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just you know what I mean, like just I'm conscious of sort of the the implicit nature of this debate that but I'm sorry, I'm a chatterbox, I'll shut up.
Yeah, don't be self-aware. We're good. We got you.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't really read books like the kind that you're talking about, but if I had to summarize sort of what I got out of what you said, it would be something like women are systematically treated as not agents in society, and thus like women's rights is like a necessary, conscious, intentional step to sort of make up for that, to sort of like try and fill in the gaps of what like women have stripped away from them. Does that sound like a good summary of what you said?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, I'm theory selling it a little bit, but yeah, that's the part of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And yes, what would be your response and your general new worldview based on?
Well, I'm going to try and make an argument, which I think is the whole point. So like when we're talking about women's rights, I'm sort of talking about something pretty, at least like kind of a general understanding. I'm not trying to pin it down. So something like women should vote, or women should like have some sort of like large scale impact on culture, economics, and like the direction of the world and policy or something. And I'm going to argue against this. And I also want to clarify for the record, because I know people are going to record me and take me out of context. I do not actually believe the argument I'm making. I am making an argument.
But I do. No,
we're not that
this
evil.
The quote, I
that
swear to God, is like deliberately taking out of context, and you're awful. That being said, okay. Right. So a lot of like the views on one second, let me pull up my notes.
Everybody subscribe. Go on.
So I want to say like women's rights have a lot of upside. I will acknowledge that there are like positive things in the women's rights arguments. And the question is not whether or not there are positive things, because if you take any sort of ideology, you can find a positive thing. Like there's people saying, well, we have this benefit that this ideology gives that no other gives. And I admit this, I acknowledge it. That's not the point I'm trying to stake here. Like the question is whether or not it is worth it, whether or not it's worth the negatives that also are included. And so my primary argument here is going to try to point out like the negatives that have been brought on by women's rights movement. So to start early on, throughout history, across cultures and across time, women's rights have not been the norm at all. It's an extremely modern new phenomenon operating in like a small pocket of the world. This is an abnormal evolution of society, right? So if we're gonna argue for like what's like sort of a natural good thing, like this argument fails already here. Basically, always women have been in a pretty clear role, generally regarded to like food preparation and child rearing. I even read some studies. I'm gonna like probably quote some studies, which I have all written down if you want sources. But basically, this is like a pretty supported ideology. People sometimes say that matriarchies were a thing. This is generally not true. The definition of matriarchy in these cases are like pretty fuzzy, inaccurate, or a little bit twisted if you want to pull up specifics. So generally, like we view the past as like women have been oppressed. So this norm is like, according to like the modern ideology, is that women have been suffering oppression throughout history because like they weren't allowed to vote or own land or whatever the shit. And there is like a pretty systemic lack of awareness of the ways in which women were not oppressed and the ways in which men were. There's a very obvious bias in the way that people like remember history due to sort of like our modern circumstances, which I'll get into. But when people remember history, they don't really acknowledge the fact that at one point in time, 17 more women per men reproduced, as in 1 out of every 17 men got to pass on their line. Men were much more likely to die in wars. Men evolved muscles for a reason. Like you don't think that like evolution just decided to grant men like incredible physical strength, aggression, and risk taking just because it was fun? No, it gave it to men and not women, because men had the actual pressure where they, if it weren't like that, they would die. Whereas if women weren't strong or aggressive, they would live. And this is really strong evidence that historically women were like protected by societies. They were like preserved above men. When a culture would fall to war and people would come, they would keep the women alive and they would kill the men. Basically, men are disposable and they always have been. And it seems strange to me that when we look back on history, we decide that women were the oppressed ones. That comes from like a very specific kind of like forgetfulness and bias that we have attributed to our modern culture. That's like really crazy. Let me. So this mostly changed when we didn't have scarcity anymore. So like back in the day when there were wars and animals killing you and like maybe you would starve, men served like an incredibly important function. And then once we hit like, the industrialization, we got luxury and people could maybe not die in wars or something. Like finally, the pressure that was on men for all of history was lifted. And what happened is that women were like, wait a second, men have it better, we want it to have it better too. And then men granted women this right. Like men didn't have to, right? Like men were in power. Men very easily could have been like, no. But so men did. Men gave women like the right to vote and increase status in society. And so we have this now. Like the women make up more degrees than men in basically all of education. Women are more educated. Men are like 3 times as likely to be homeless. They're 5 times as likely to be incarcerated. They have like a significantly higher suicide rate. There's basically a pretty large list of ways in which men are not supported by society. There's a huge amount of studies that show that people are more likely to feel empathy for somebody if it's a woman than a man. That is like very widely supported. People are more likely to help women. People are more likely to give women more lenient punishments for the same crime. If we were talking about race, this would be something that would be like an immense outrage, as you can tell. But because it's men, nobody cares. And why does nobody care? Nobody cares because men are perceived as having agency, which is the thing that you mentioned. Men are given agency. But the reverse side to agency that nobody talks about is like lack of care, lack of responsibility. The things that happen to you are your fault. In the way that women are removed from agency, women are also given like a lot of empathy and care and social support. They're like, well, if you're not responsible for this, we need to help you. And for men, they are responsible for the good things and also every single one of the bad things. And the fact, and like in that, men are not allowed to complain, right? Because like men complaining is like sort of putting the blame on other people instead of taking it onto themselves. Complaining is an externalized locus of responsibility, while accepting responsibility is internalized. And so when you have like this imbalance and like men are having a shit time in some ways and women are having a shit time in others, but only one of them is allowed to get social support and help, it's going to look like there's an imbalance. It's going to look like women are having a terrible time because that's the only thing that we're allowed to acknowledge or talk about. And so this is not just hurting men, like women also are having a shitty time too. Women's happiness has been steadily decreasing despite incredible advances in equality over the last few decades. Women are reporting like difficulty finding romantic partners because now men are not earning as much as they are. Women have a lifespan, I think 7 years longer than men in the US. But they're not having a great time, right? So there's something weird going on here. Like this change that we had with women's rights really started like giving this inequality in relationships that is not acknowledged. It is like systematically like rerouted. Like when you said, Gio, your argument that like women are the freedom is taken away from women. Like that's exactly what I'm talking about. People view it as women taken away from women, right? And it's like men's responsibility. When I was religious, the people who were responsible for the enforcement of gender roles and sexism was women. And it's crazy to me that people are like, oh, well, we're going to take the agency away from what women did and give it to men. And so women are more likely, I'm going to keep going and then I'll be done with my primary argument. Women are more likely to support greater government oversight. They're more likely to say that free speech should not be allowed. pretty significant. 30% of 30% more men than women surveyed on one survey said that men were more likely, like 70%, that free speech should be supported, and women were like 40% or something. Basically, like policy-wise, when it comes to like actually governing like the perspective of like how we should be operating, women systematically want to remove freedoms much more than men do. They're more likely to want external help, as we have seen. This is very much in line with a lot of the way society treats men. Women are much more likely to want external help instead of having like an internal locus of control. So generally, it seems like it's a bad idea to have women in government, to have women have rights, to have them have power. This seems to lead to like sexual imbalances that lead to unhappiness for both genders. It leads to like an inability to see the problems that men are facing, and it leads to worse policy. There's a study in New Zealand that showed that women on average took $122,000 from the government. They were like a net expense, and men were positive in that, like when it comes to tax spending, men were a contributor and women ultimately took on average. Is this what we want? Like, it seems like we're in denial about like what's going on. It seems like pretty clear to me that like women's rights was some sort of pretty big misstep. And I agree that it did some good things. You can say some good things that it did do. But my question is it really worth the really strong societal problems that we're facing today? Now I'm done.
Gio, is it worth it?
Oh my God, I don't know what to say now. Holy crap. I'm shaking in my boots.
Well, we could always go.
This is terrible. I already lost. That's too based of a point.
It was a based point. Yes.
I don't know. She's been.
Chat
I think she Google. I think she's
for
been
being hysterical because they're the Simps versus the Hatred Squad.
Yeah. Well, Verse, you have a point. Then I don't know. This is like, I think maybe Aella, she went to the archives of Return of Kings or something before this debate. This is, oh my God. But Verse, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just acknowledging the chat for being funny, but
yes.
I'm not gonna. Do I have to argue your point?
No, don't. No, please, or I'm not watching.
Yeah,
okay.
He's not part of. Verse is not part of the official debate.
I'm not a part of the official debate. No.
Yeah.
I basically have to. I have to like argue against all of those, manosphere points I learned when I was like 15 years old. So, anyways,
you thought this
we
was
also have my
easy?
good friend Alexandra in the chat.
Yes,
who is also a fellow artist. And
welcome, Alexandra.
By the way, for the chat, I am, as people know, I am also an artist. Press 1 if I should draw Aella. Press 2 if I shouldn't. So there you go. So okay, let's get
right here.
Okay, so Aella is saying that okay.
I have her points down. I've written
comment from Jules, by the way. Aella just way smarter than Gio.
Right.
Is that what Jules?
I have the argumentation written down point by point.
All of those books have never been opened. Jules, do you want me to go with my webcam and look at the spines of my books? Anyways, okay, so the argument being that men are uniquely in a position of deficit and suffering ever since the advent of universally codified women's rights. But a counter argument would be that the only way we can sort of arrive. And let me just use really quickly a sort of intergenerational trauma argument. Throughout human history, the vast majority of the experiences of women have been negative, and this has led to a lot of both negative outcomes for men and women. So, for instance, this is relating to sexual persona. The argument would be that a lot of this was the essay Manosphere of Women too. A lot of this sort of energy with the oppression of women is largely a product of this sort of, I would almost say, mystical and reified fear of the feminine itself that has influenced the thinking of men throughout human history. And therefore, men are still struggling with this capacity to subdue the feminine, which is ultimately this creative force, the chthonic feminine. But by doing so, the reason men are uniquely experiencing certain negative material outcomes is by and large because we haven't yet fully integrated what it means to live in a truly egalitarian society. So therefore, there will be a lot of growing pains going forward. And the argument is like comparing what men are facing now to the systematic horrors of human history when it comes to the female subject. And the argument would be that it doesn't outweigh the sort of costs of going back to when we didn't have universal women's rights. That will be another point. But also this notion of the sort of, now that female, women's rights are the norm, and therefore it's going to lead to certain things. Really, it's that view itself is limited because it's viewing power relations, and it's viewing things like culture and society as sort of like an either or zero-sum game, which is really a very myopic, not a myopic, but a very negative and almost destructive way of viewing what it means to grant embodiment to people. So again, this is almost like the basic argument for like a feminist posthumanism, like the greater extension of womanhood into a sort of out of the conception of just mere basic humanism and negative rights, but rather to a form of recognition. Then female embodiment will become something that is greater and more creative and not hampered by just merely a transactional sort of thing of we're going to grant you rights. Because even this language of men granting women's their rights and their personhood is fundamentally against a lot of sort of the notion of women experiencing full personhood in general. So this is a basic, feminist point, that the language of men granting rights to women, that in itself is another form of domination, because it is therefore, it's not the role of the masculine to give to the feminine, but rather it's sort of this more creative outlook of the feminine having to take possession of their own capacity to be recognized, not just as a sort of, liberal subject, homo economicus, this economic exchange of, women can now, enter the workplace, or women can vote. It's not just that women are granted the capacity to enter into the machines of modern technocratic liberal society, but it's more rather recognizing something greater than merely a negative rights-based model that is just granting women abilities within society. It's rather women taking their own personhood and therefore crafting an alternative model of, society and subjectivity and so forth. So this argument, this language of men granting women's rights, that in itself is problematic.
During first wave feminism, like hundreds of women died fighting for their rights. They were imprisoned, they were raped and force fed. Women died in prison all the time. It was a very controversial position to advocate for voting rights for women.
Oh, and now, Alexandra, that's another good point. Is also another counterpoint would be that the sort of deficits that men are experiencing, it doesn't account for the ways in which sexuality as such, and sort of feminine sexuality, has been weaponized and used as a tool of surveillance, humiliation, policing, medicalization, yet over womanhood itself. But at the same time, there's a profound ignorance of the sort of not just female anatomy, but also the sort of interpersonal relationships of women that has been produced by a patriarchal model of medicine. And of course, rape and, various taboos over certain aspects of sexuality. And, this is the classic argument. Certain taboos around the sexual act itself has by and large produced a number of very negative and harmful mental pathologies for men and women. And it largely centers around the censorship and the policing and the surveillance of female sexuality. And
one of my
there you go. Alexander, please go ahead.
One of my favorite books on the subject, Wilhelm Reich, talked a lot about suppressing sexuality and how it's impacted, sort of how men and women interact, and how fascism is a product of sexual repression. And sort of,
oh yes, yeah, and that's another argument, Aella, is that as more women take on the reins of society, we will have a less fascistic society, because there will be more values of empathy and tolerance, and there will be a greater capacity for the expression of interpersonal feelings among the group, rather than the sort of will to power that fascism ultimately relies on. So.
Well, now as moderator, I want to go to Aella, and since you were bringing up sexuality just now, ask Aella, what do you think would happen to somebody who is at this point critical of too much rampant sexuality? What are some of the negatives that would happen for, let's say, a young woman who would be encouraged to get into certain fields related with sexuality?
To clarify, you're asking what are some of the downsides for people who want to enter sex work?
Yes, and not just sex work, but in general, just the overall mood post-sexual revolution.
What is the problem with women having greater capacity for sexual expression? Is there a problem with that, Aella?
That doesn't be a problem
with that?
Wait, I'm confused.
No problem.
Am I answering? What am I answering as right now?
So you're basically talking about the problems, the problems that would occur when a woman would have, let's say, more access to sexual adventures, whether we're talking about sleeping with more men, whether we're talking about pursuing a career in the sexual arts. Any of these things, they stem from
the dark arts.
The dark arts. Any of these things, they stem from, you could say, women's liberation. They stem from more freedom, more women's rights. And that is definitely one of the flowers that's grown on this bush of women's rights. So it's definitely something that I'm interested in getting your take on, as far as certain repercussions that would occur from it.
Yeah, I mean, like, birth control entered the scene, and now women are having a lot more sex. I don't consider this very strictly within the guise of women's rights, because there's not like really a lot of policy around it, I guess. But we definitely are seeing like greater stresses on men, because men getting laid has been historically a problem, especially because, like, as we've seen historically, more women reproduce than men reproduce. There's like a pretty significant number of men raising kids that aren't their own. So like this pressure against sexual promiscuity naturally comes from this sort of thing. Like, people undervalue and underappreciate the importance that sexual satisfaction is to men. And is rated as like the most pleasurable experience, according to one study, that anybody has ever had. As in, there's a study where they called people directly after, like randomly throughout the day, asked them, what were you just doing? And then asked them to rate their current mood. And out of all of the things that people did, the highest mood effort was sex. Men get more pleasure out of sex than women, as in the sense of more like social standing. Views of men who have sex increase, and views of women who have sex sort of decrease. But it is extremely difficult for men to get sex. There's a higher correlation between the times women want sex and when they get it than the times when men want sex and they get it. I think it's pretty significant. I think like the R on the first one was like 0.4, or the R on the second was like 0.1 or something. Yeah, it's great. There's like really no context in regards to like the power of women versus men, and a lot of the pushback is like an attempt to sort of equalize that power, which if I am arguing against what I think is very justified, because like if we really care about men's mental health, like we really need to sort of produce some sort of culture where men are not shamed for their sexuality.
Wait a minute, Aella. If I'm arguing against this, what you're saying is that you want poor sex workers to be subject to greasy, disgusting, terrible, misogynistic incels. You want state subsidized GFs. You really want to subject women to being state subsidized, the state run, joy divisions. Is that what you want to bring back?
Universal basic waifu.
Universal basic waifu. Is that what you want, Aella? Don't you think that's degrading to women? Don't you think that the emotional labor expended by going with a fat, disgusting incel such as, don't you think that that's terrible? That you would be subjecting half the population to this sort of weird Marxoid sexual economy? I'm not Marxoid, sorry. I'm arguing against it. yeah. So don't you think that it's terrible that women have to be subject to these poor losers that can't get a girl because they're, they're 5'6" or whatever? I mean, come on, terrible.
Well, yeah,
Well, I have a question for you. Go ahead.
Oh, there is, yeah. I mean, it is true. Like, there's a lot more ugly men than there are women. You know,
Whoa.
women really.
That's
the fact
literally
of
impossible.
nature, though.
That's
That's
literally
true.
impossible.
No, it's
Just
true.
no.
Women are the fairer sex. We have the advantage right built in, blocked in. Like, I'm sure.
Well,
like,
we have
obviously,
three
ugly
very
women
beautiful
exist.
women in the chat right now. Default friend, I don't know if you can hear me.
I
But,
mean, like, statistically, that doesn't make any sense, but it's fine. Continue. Keep with your point.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I think that's also a contributing factor as to why like women find it easier to get a partner. Is that like, you know, you can be sort of homely as a woman, but there's a lot of stuff we can do to, you know, balance that out. Men, if you're just like, if you're like truly ugly, and I do believe that there are like more, like you go on Tinder and like, you know, if you. Like there's just so many just like sort of boring,
We've
like
seen the stats.
unattractive
Girls don't like
men
men that
out
much.
there. Yeah.
Yes.
Like
the argument being is that what are you going to do about it? Do you think that we should have a sort of a more like sort of like, you know, return to a communal basis of subjectivity where, you know, it's acceptable to marry women off instead of like a purely negative rights-based egalitarian system where people are free to choose their own partners? And do you think that just because some losers have a bad outcome that women should suffer for the decision that, you know, men are ugly? Like yeah.
I mean,
it's
yeah.
definitely men's fault that only 5% of men get chosen on dating apps. That's totally natural distribution of it's a basic.
Verse, you another pro woman argument. Verse, you've inspired in me. Don't you think that the selection basis, the 80-20 incel rule, don't you think that that's just a natural form of a return to sort of the Pareto principle, that it's not wrong for women to have a hypergamous selection bias because they're weeding out the genetic refuse?
It's actually more of like a hyper Pareto, dude, on dating apps now.
Right. No, but don't you think it's women should have the right to select their mate, to weed out these 6'5" ugly, disgusting incels from the gene pool? Don't you think that? So sorry, I know this is Aella's point, but Alexandria, then Aella, how you counterpoint to my yeah?
You meant 5'6".
Clear. Go ahead.
He meant 5'6". He didn't mean 6'5". That's what the confusion.
Sorry, 5'6". Yeah, sorry. No, 6'5". You are a god among men. My father is 6'5", by the way. I'm only like 5'10". I unfortunately, but you know, but it doesn't matter. But 5'10" in Italian is actually 7 foot. So don't worry.
That's a good point, actually. You're right.
Go ahead, Alexandria. Then Aella.
Oh no, I was just remarking on the 6'5" comment. I'm like, I'm not sure what you meant to say because.
Yeah, sorry, I meant to say 5'6".
So wait, I'll put in a point that I have not heard said, and I'll play my I'll do like the race card here. The half the reason for women's rights in America was what's her face? Can't remember her name at the moment. Susan B. Anthony. No. Was it for the 19th Amendment? Susan B. Anthony, whoever it was. It was because they were mad that black men got the right to vote before women, and it was. Oh yeah, no, there was an instant pushback.
A lot of the big argument was that like we need more white women, we need more white votes, and so if you bring in white women, they'll counteract the black vote.
So they were used instrumentally. It wasn't really like a we actually care what you think type of thing.
Well, I mean that's generally how things happen. Like rarely, like we're not a very utilitarian. Like you get like utilitarian species where like I feel like things generally happen when there's some sort of like. You know, if somebody has like an agenda, and it doesn't need to be, you know, a positive or a progressive one. It just needs to be something that happens. You know, things will get done. People rarely will do things or pass laws out of the kindness of their hearts.
Now we touched on sexuality. What I would be particularly interested in touching on would be pornography, and the way that I see it would relate to.
I talked a bit about that, Lev, but yeah.
Well. I'm just curious about when it comes to, let's say, protecting women from the, you know, I mean, obviously you had back in the old days, you know, the various pimps and producers that would, in the porn industry, there would be some abuse that was going on. The other question is when it comes to a woman freely choosing her future, what she wants to pursue, would there be any argument, Aella, as far as women's rights go, that have to do with influence, that have to do with, let's say, protecting women from making certain choices early on that maybe later on they end up figuring out that maybe this was not the right path for me? And again, everybody's different. I don't want to say that one person's path should be the same as somebody else's. But as far as certain people who could have made a different decision if they would have gotten, some talking to by somebody else who would have persuaded them, do you think that there would be anything that, let's say, the state, because we are talking about women's rights here, that the state would be able to implement that would be able to act as a safeguard for those young women?
Okay. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm like a little slow or something. But to clarify here, so in my argument against women's rights,
Yes.
I don't view like pornography or sex work as part of that, in the sense that like pornography and sex work has been, or like sex work has been all ancient, is very common.
Oldest profession. Yes.
Right. So when I'm saying like let's roll back the clock on like women's rights, like I'm not thinking about pornography. So when you're asking specifically about pornography, in my anti-women's rights frame, I don't have a good answer to that. And are you looking for an answer as like my actual?
No,
frame?
but maybe address my point about because Buff in the chat didn't say, she didn't get a chance to answer my point about how women shouldn't be subject to the negative outcomes of a budgeting, growing demographic of men, in the lack of sexual expression, incels, blah blah blah.
Wait.
State subsidized waifus.
Wait, sorry. What's the question? I missed this. I'm confused too now.
No. But my point, I was arguing. I know this is fucking confusing. I was arguing against Aella's point about the negative outcomes of women having a greater autonomy when it comes to sexual selection, and my point was that it would be taking back the clock, and it would be subjecting women to basically becoming concubines that are in this like Joy Division type of like state-run, mass universal GF program, and how that would basically make it would create a society that would be, monstrous beyond belief.
Is this what you think happened before we had women's sexual agency?
Oh. Sorry, fucking confused. No, yeah. The norm before was, I mean, hypergamy was always the reality. So now to rebel against it just because women have greater autonomy and they're more honest with the fact that they have the ability to select for certain mates, I think is wrong-headed from my feminist perspective. I think that women always were the selectors, but they were being systematically denied their capacity to select by a patriarchal society and being forced into arranged marriages and so forth, where they didn't have autonomy over what they perceived as a collective worth of what a man should be worthy for, rather than what society told them they should select for in terms of finding a partner. And of course, this also marginalized lesbians, trans, and so Tony Soprano said trans whatevers. This marginalized alternative female sexualities as well, because it was such a great selection pressure towards patriarchal standards of what constitutes the family, for instance.
Baby Factory.
Yeah, Baby Factory. There you go. Yeah.
Are you saying that in the past, as a whole, women were less satisfied with their relationships than men were because they were like forced into it or something?
Yeah. There you go.
This seems testable. This seems like something we could try and figure out. I also suspect it's kind of implausible. I have to think about it.
Okay, so the impasse we're at here is that Gio's talking Baby Factory, and we want to test whether or not women are incapable of really enjoying their previous arrangement, given that they lack agency, and then they're traded like sheep and pigs.
They're horse traded, yeah.
Yeah, they're traded like horses. one would argue so far as it's
Jesus.
No, this one I need to put the
you gotta
put on
say
the
that
screen.
one up. That's too great.
Here.
That's too much. Oh my god.
Gio's thinking about his farm and
Oh my god.
with a smoking the Corcorino pack over here.
Oh.
But
Gio's living in the Windows 95 desktop.
Oh, we'll make our own gabagool on the farm. Don't worry about it.
so let me bring a point into the mix to might add some clarity. So
You know what's funny is that I'm actually kind of sort of coming around to the actual, like, unironically, the feminist viewpoint.
See, there we go. This
No,
is why we
disavow.
do these. This is why we do these
Wow,
things. We want to put
So-
people in
Partial.
different shoes, in the other person's shoes.
Sorry, go ahead, Verse. Go ahead.
My question is, in this particular case, can we speak to suffrage in particular, right? Because then it gives like a more grounded perspective. Did providing suffrage to women add positives to society, or did it actually take away women's ability to actually get positive, outcomes? This is I think a more grounded discussion here. So whomever feels like taking it over.
One study I have found that the long-term effect of women's suffrage was 3 to 8 times increase in spending.
Oh, nice. Well, good for the economy. That's a plus.
All right. So yeah, so spending's increased, but like let's say like actual like your desires of the woman themselves, right? Are when you're adding more people to the voting pool, like possible voters, right? Each person's vote's worth less. People are now motivated more by particular individual interests as opposed to the familial unit, right? So more rights and pushing women into the workforce changes the dynamics of like society in general, right? Is this actually better for women on the whole, or is this actually just everyone's kind of reduced to mush, right? So I don't know. Gio and Aella can have at it, I guess. I don't know if that's a question.
When women vote for worse policies, women are more likely to vote for policies that I disagree with.
Oh yeah, women are more likely to be anti-abortion. Which I always thought was crazy.
Yeah. So
God,
giving
Anyways.
women
This is
voting
like
just
hell right
is
now.
policy.
No, but don't you think that if women are, oh God, how can I say this? Sorry, go ahead, Aella. I didn't cut you off, did I?
I don't remember.
So I'm hearing that like you're saying that women get the right to vote, so then they, as a consequence, are also voting against their own theoretical
Best interests, yeah.
from a feminist perspective.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Right, you might argue that from your perspective, like abortion would be good because it gives women more freedom, I guess.
Agency,
right?
sexual agency.
Sexual
And
agency.
bodily-
I'm arguing that position, Verse. Oh,
Yeah, no, that's what I'm trying to like.
yes.
help you out.
No, but more so, don't you think that the policies that women vote for only seem disadvantageous to society because we've existed within sort of a patriarchal structure for so long that what's the saying goes, equality looks like oppression to the privileged, sort of deal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could argue that, but like then we get down to like a value thing. Like if you don't think that freedom of speech is really that great, then yeah, you probably should want more women to vote. Like if you want there to be like generally like less individual freedom and more like top-down control of people's lives, then yeah, then we should have women vote even more than men. So I'm sort of operating from the assumption that you share at least some basic values that I do. And if you do, then we can agree that women voting in general has a negative impact on those issues.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that women vote, what you constitute as freedom of speech has legitimized very negative discourses towards women in general, and that by allowing this sort of libertarian view of this like a dude bro libertarian view of freedom of speech, that you are thus legitimizing really a huge amount of psychic violence against women in general, and that women only vote to rather protect the sense of belonging and subjectivity of certain minorities and groups in society that have been denied their rights. Sort of in that sense, freedom of speech legitimizes actual oppression of women, minorities, and so forth.
So if you have two groups of people who have like roughly equal rates of victimization, and then you tell everybody that one is worse than the other, did you know that men are raped at the same rate as women? A same percentage of men have experienced rape.
but it's being raped by other men, honey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that doesn't count.
Like triggered me a little bit.
Yeah. They
No,
get their
so-
cheeks busted. No, sorry.
Right, but like my point is like we don't care about male rape because we
We think it's
ascribe
funny.
to women and men are disposable. So if we are like looking at this as a very well established thing in society, and then we go, what is the thing that you just said? I completely forgot.
Cheeks busted?
What?
Nothing.
No,
Don't worry.
about
That was for the chat.
freedom of speech legitimizes oppression.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
And then so if we are infantilizing women in this way, if we are really paying attention to the ways in which they're hurt and blowing it up and telling them you are right to experience suffering, then they are going to experience suffering. For example, women are more likely to rate, I think 3 to 5 times more likely, depending on what the exact question, more likely to rate flirtation by men as sexual assault now than they were before.
Mm-hmm.
As in 28% of women believe that rate winking as a form of sexual harassment, whereas before only 6% did. So there is a thing where the narratives in society are actively changing the way that people are perceiving a persecution against them. And so
but don't
what
you
you're
think
doing
that-
is-
Go ahead. Sorry.
well, you're saying now when it comes to free speech, there's this violence against women like that's being spoken. Like, isn't it like important for women to have these things? I'm saying, no, this is the narrative that is changing. We are supporting the narrative that there is violence against women, and we are like coddling and infantilizing them, where men are like the ones that this is not happening to. And so but what we do is we give like women power in voting. And doing so, we say like, hey, like bad things are happening to you. And then they like emphasize all of the bad things that happen to increase the perception of inequality. Like when it gets down to it, when women are empathetic, but only for in-groups, when it comes to out-groups, when it comes to groups that people like do not perceive as like one of them, they are more hostile. Like for example, like immigrants and immigration. So like you could argue that like women are like kinder, more inclusive, but it's only to a point. If you actually want true inclusivity, even for people who are not part of the in-group, you have to look for men. And this is what like the male freedom of speech support is getting at here. Like men actually want protection for speech that they legitimately disagree with. Women are more likely to be unable to tolerate disagreement than men, based on a couple studies that I read. So like in my perspective, like this whole argument that you're making is stemming from like the system that is perpetuating women as victims and men as oppressors.
But don't you think that you are framing it this sort of like manosphere libertarian dude bro argument? Don't you think you're framing it in such a way whereas the standards of male discourse and camaraderie are being imposed upon women who think and feel fundamentally differently about the nature of certain encoded behaviors? So for instance, don't you think that there is a sexual undertone to a lot of this catcalling, a lot of these innuendos, a lot of these unconscious biases against women that sexualize women? Wait, I'm arguing for liberal human rights. So, besides that, don't you think that it's invalidating the experiences of women by allowing this sort of negative libertarian-based social interaction, whereas women are experiencing legitimate forms of sexualization against their will, and that to say to them that they should just man up, they should grow a pair, that is imposing essentially a sort of caricature of masculinity upon the ways in which women interact with people within society and culture, and that in a way it invalidates what women are actually trying to achieve by saying to them, I'm sorry, sweetie, but this is the way the world works, you know, if you want equality, blah, blah, blah. And about prison rape, statistically, women are not raped by other women, they're raped by men, and men are the cause of most acts of violence. against other men. But statistically, when it comes to cross-gender relations, when it comes to violence, it's more so the case that men are imposing violence and harassment and against women. So
so if you have, let's say,
can't believe Jules is trolling me in the chat, by the way. So go ahead.
The chat is actually really funny today. I have to give it a lot of credit.
I thought the chat was gonna be worse. My God,
it's making me die laughing with some of these. But
go ahead, Aella. Sorry.
Let's say we have a computer simulation that's like very advanced and it's modeling like some sort of culture. And then in this computer simulation, you take two cultures. And then you sort of like run them. You run a simulation with one culture dominant, and then you run a simulation with the other, and then you go for a very long time. I would argue that we would definitely see one in which one, likely one is going to do better. It's like very unlikely that like they both perform equally well. Like we're definitely like if you have like a difference in policy, like one of those is going to like result in like a more flourishing, greater economic, like more freedom, more happiness, and the other isn't, most likely. So if we're talking about like women have one way of approaching the world and men have the other, it seems weird to argue that both of them should result in equal flourishing. I'm arguing like if you're like, oh, like this is just a dude bro masculine way of approaching the world, and you're just sort of suppressing women. Like the idea is like, well, like if you are having like a debate of culture, yes, it would like necessarily follow that one of them actually is superior. And so just saying like, by saying like, oh, well, you can't argue that one of them is superior. I'm like, that is the entire point. That is exactly what the argument is.
Superior to what metric? To a the sort of what you're using in terms of modeling in the sort of what you're ascribing is sort of a economic determinism, that therefore in this brute force of competition between people on an individual basis, that therefore it's sort of like if women have a negative outcome, it's their own fault. Don't you think that's sort of like a weird form of social Darwinism that in itself has been a driving force of the dominator patriarchal ego throughout the human centuries, and that women have in a lot of ways suffered at the hands of this really almost, you could say, post-enlightenment basis of negative of social Darwinism, in a sense, that therefore women should be like men. And so basically you want to turn women, you want to deny them of their subjectivity in this sense. You want to basically turn them into mutilated forms of men. You want them to basically LARP as masculine creatures, and you want to deny their sense of personhood by saying that they should just go along with this brutal homo economicus existence where if social outcomes are, suffer at the hands of economic output, then economic output should just win. And
So,
sorry. And by the way, I'm sorry to Gojira in the chat if by me talking you're not being able to goon.
Gojira.
So I love Gojira, but I'm sorry if by my voice is distracting from your gooning.
That was the funniest comment I've seen all day. But I would like to point out here your point, Gio, here is that the women should not have to aspire to a masculine economic
standard of economic output.
But isn't the arguments for their rights, right? So they would in theory be arguing to be equal, right? So are you making an argument of equity? Like things are not, they don't want equality, they want to be different yet somehow also equal yet.
Well, it's because see, human rights are just a basic metric and standard of codifying what is the recognition of oneself in society. Therefore, we need to expand rather than contract human rights in this model, because it doesn't account for all of the various residual slippages of differences between men and women. And until we can truly have an equal society between men and women, between the genders, and between people who do not conform to sorry, I forgot to mention, people who do not conform to those gender standards, we will never truly know the potentialities of women by subjecting them to the standards of a male dominator patriarchal society. Damn.
So wait,
I feel like I'm just talking too much. I'm very sorry.
Have we considered the that despite women's desire to unburden themselves of their
are you making Aella's point right now, Verse?
I don't know if I'm trying to not agree with her, but it's sometimes hard. because she's arguing for my position. But anyway, but is it possible that that women are giving up their bargaining chip in this social game we playing by trying to unburden themselves from reproductive factory with things like the pill and things like that?
But then you would say that standard of a woman. Okay, so that was a survival mechanism that women had to adopt in order to defend themselves somewhat against the machinations of the masculine by basically weaponizing their own, the only tool that they had throughout human history. Not really, but for the sake of argument, the only tool that they had throughout human history was their control over their sexuality. And a lot of times that was taken by force anyways. So that argument is mute within a lot of hunter-gatherer arrangements. Up until recently, the prohibitions against rape and incest are a very relatively recent phenomenon. And throughout human history, the sort of defense mechanism that women had to control their own reproduction was violently obviated by the masculine. So it would be the argument that doesn't that deficit need to be dealt with in order to truly realize an egalitarian social arrangement? Aella?
Yeah,
Or
like a counterpoint. I don't know. That was my contribution. Counterpoint for Aella.
Like a lot of like the language that you're using is very fuzzy and confusing, and I'm not certain that it's supported by any data. There's like a lot of like vague words that sort of gesticulate at some sort of like emotional thing that like it doesn't seem to correspond to anything stronger. One thing I did want to address in what you said is something that like do I just want women to like buck it up and like like stop crying about it and basically become masculine? And like the answer is like, well, I want equality between the sexes. So yes, basically. And most of what you said I didn't like fully understand because like it seems to be from sort of theory I'm not really familiar with.
So wait, so you're arguing for equality of like a standard liberal position of like, or are you talking from your own actual perspective in that last thing you just said?
Oh no, I'm not. I'm like.
Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so maybe we should debate.
Yes. At this point, I thought this was a very interesting experiment to see what it's like in the other person's shoes. Now, one thing that I would say, Aella, since
I got to go back to being a terrible incel misogynist.
It does. I will say it does lower toxicity for at least an hour. So that's nice.
Yeah, that's good.
The chat has been
by the way, sorry to someone in the chat, I slipped up. No, the prohibition of incest is quite ancient, but there was one feminist author, I believe the woman who wrote The Chalice and the Blade, that talked about how incest at various points was weaponized against female subjectivity. So the prohibition was only therefore partially enforced depending on which period of human history. But that book has been contested. As for my true opinion on things, I think this was productive. It made me poke holes in a lot of the, manosphere stuff that we all.
Wait 1 second, just for those who are confused in the chat for latecomers, they were arguing the opposite position for the past hour. So Gio was arguing for feminism, and Ao was arguing for
women's rights in particular.
Rights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually hate women. So no, I'm fucking.
But we have now entered into the genuine sincerity zone. So the Shinra Tensei is about to begin. So anyway, continue.
All right.
I'm not the moderator.
Well, here's what I'm interested in, and I was sort of hinting at it before when I was speaking with Aella, and it was a little bit dodged, which I understand because it's weird. I don't know if it's technically part of women's rights or not. I would say, like, when you have something like, forget the world's oldest profession for a second. If we're just talking about pornography, like, what do we have? We had Playboy that ended up coming out before that. We had some more underground things that were persecuted. I don't know whether the motivations for persecuting those was to keep, like, horny young men away from the porno mags, or if it did have something to do with, like, the chastity or nobility of, like, the young maiden. I don't know which one. Maybe it's a mix of both.
No, sorry, continue.
No, go on.
They were trying to remove the unsavory elements from society, right? They're trying to, with like, in particular with like pornography and like the whole obscenity thing. There was like, it creates an underworld when you're already dealing with like prohibition and other stuff at the time. that like those the pornography industry adds another like seedy underbelly to the
Yeah. But now
overall-
things are different. I mean, in a way, like with OnlyFans, you do have the opportunity to be your own boss, not to have to be under some kind of a pimp or some kind of a greedy porn producer or whatever. Like you have an opportunity to do your own thing. But I guess the question still goes back for me personally, what I'm interested in, because I think it's kind of in the crux of a lot of these conversations that have taken place around yourself, Aella. And again, this is why I really appreciate you coming on, because I am personally curious about this. Like, would you be able to go in the other person's shoes, like the shoes of the person who would be against a lot of these things with OnlyFans? And again, you're like highly rated on OnlyFans. You're like on the 0 point, I don't know what it is, but you are like way up there. But as far as young women who want to make a choice as to go into this or not, like my biggest concern has been, personally again speaking, with certain encouragements of girls going into it without considering an alternate path from somebody else. And to me, it speaks about, let's say, the whole idea of manufacturing consent, where you would have different things that go out in the ether, different advertising firms, different things to kind of cement what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I'm curious, your own take, like regardless of any of the argumentation we've been doing, your own personal take on where you stand with that.
On whether or not it is like damaging to say that OnlyFans is fine for young women?
Yeah. I mean, that would be, and again, damaging, it's a really wide thing that you could say here regarding what is damaging. I don't personally know, but I can imagine that for somebody who is like young, impressionable, that it may be better to, to get different opinions. And do you think that now there is more of a thrust to go into these industries, just encouragement online, general, like somebody made a lot of money through this, and that people may not want to make that decision if somebody else were to give them an alternative that they would have never had?
This sounds sort of like the general question is like, does something become immoral when you offer a lot of money for it? Like, is it immoral for me to offer you $1 million to like punch somebody else, or like to pay Joe to like have sex with an incel or something? Like,
yeah, I mean, money is definitely money is definitely a part of it for sure.
But
yeah.
I think here is more the Faustian bargain is kind of the question.
Just for the record, I'm a Volcel. Okay,
It's
not coke.
It's the allure of the money, because the graphs would demonstrate that most people don't make the money that is kind of portrayed as it being easy cash.
But I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Aella.
No, I mean, I'm sort of trying to like tease out the exact question here, because like there's a lot of like different kinds of answers depending on exactly the question.
So the exact question he was asking is, there's a appeal for a lot of money with doing like pornography or OnlyFans, right? And this is a bargain because there's a lot of downsides to being in this particular industry.
Yeah.
So the question he's asking is, do you think this is a moral thing to do to to kind of like promote such a possible such a bargain, like to promote OnlyFans lifestyle or what have you?
I mean, generally deception is immoral. And if you're telling somebody that they like have a higher chance of making a lot of money than they do in order to get something out of them, or because you want to even advance an agenda, I don't know, that does seem immoral. So any sort of circumstance that incorporates deception, I think like to the degree in which deception is incorporated really depends on like the kind of culture you're in and like who you're talking to.
Well, even without money, even without deception, if we're just talking about, let's say you're going to go on a career that's going to make you richer than Alexander the Great. But the other question is this something that a lot of people would necessarily want to go for, if not being sold this glamorous lifestyle that regardless of, let's say there's no deception. Let's say there's somebody out there
the argument...
who's like totally qualified. Let's say they're young, they're beautiful, they've got great breasts. Like they're totally qualified and they would probably make a lot of money doing this. But the question is there a moral, let's say, thought to be had here as far as like, should maybe people think twice about giving that kind of advice to young women because maybe she would have done something else? I don't know.
I think what a better question would be, by the way, for the chat, we're off debate mode, so this is my real opinion. But as I was arguing, though, I did come to a few realizations that the whole, this is why I said in the beginning, my true opinion is that I don't hate women, but I think the rights-based even just saying that, like, it's like I have to qualify. But anyways, I feel like the deficit of the rights-based model does not account for the full picture of human subjectivity. So when it comes to, for example, I was listening to the Unheard interview with Aella. You were saying about how OnlyFans wrestles control away from the porn producers, whoever they may be, Zero HP Lovecraft in the chat, the porn producers that have historically exploited young women, and the sort of the very vicious cycle that goes into a lot of like mainstream pornography. The argument that you posited was that it wrestles control away from direct exploitation, and it gives people producing pornographic content control over their own output and what they're cool with doing, and they're no longer apart from like just brute market incentives, they're no longer subject to being forced to do things against their will or against their own personal limitations. But what would you say to someone like me who would say that in a way it's almost like rationalizing a form of internalized servitude and exploitation to market forces that eventually demand that, like, okay, Aella does more extreme stuff, and therefore to pursue an economic interest, you're going to consent to that, but you're being tricked into what you think is liberation by something that opens the door for more nuanced forms of exploitation that is based around your participation in it.
That's a established feminist point, actually.
Yeah, this is like classic.
Any pornography is ultimately, it's going to be exploitated in a capitalistic context.
But furthermore, do you think, Aella, that I think what Lev is asking is fundamentally the question around human value. Now, you have, without mischaracterizing, you have more of a materialistic basis, not materialistic, but like you have more of a rationalistic basis of human value. And for someone like me who's still a very religious person, who believes in sort of a metaphysical view of human nature, I think that the sort of display of one's own sexuality without the context of ritual and without the context of intimacy is sort of like creating a weird form of the marketization of intimacy. And to me, it's like that's even greater than of a horror than even, pornography, just seeing people fucking, because seeing people fucking is one thing, but like seeing someone LARP as an intimate relation and commodifying that, to me, I feel is a very huge detriment for both men and women. And I'm curious because you, Aella, I think you're the perfect person to argue with about this, because you have thought about this immensely and your experiences have contributed to your worldview of so just go ahead. Yeah. What do you think of someone like me who's very critical of what you're doing or whatever?
I think that it is true that for some people, commoditizing sex makes it not special. So I think there's probably a large subset of the population where if they had to do an OnlyFans or something, they would have a lot of trauma from it, and they probably shouldn't do it. So if that's what you're saying, I agree with you. I think I generally am really into, it's going to sound cheesy, but informed consent financially as well. If you know clearly what you're doing and you decide that the benefits are worth it to you, then it's your responsibility what your choice is. And so when you're talking about people glamorizing sex work or something, my concern is there deception? And if there's deception, then it's not informed consent, and I don't agree with it. And I would probably agree with you that this is bad. But if somebody's presented an accurate summary of the facts, yes, there is a market incentive. If you perform these sex acts, if you have a chance of earning between this amount of money, and then they choose to, it feels very strange to me to tell them that they're doing something wrong. That's sort of a stepping over a boundary that I don't really feel comfortable doing.
But again, this is an argument which I was unironically defending before last hour. This is an argument sort of against this affirmative consent model that has led to more nuanced forms of exploitation. Even if people aren't being deceived, do you think that there is a cheapening of yourself going on by putting yourself out there in such a gratuitous, for lack of a better term, gratuitous form of a display, whether through
What do you mean by
OnlyFans or whatnot.
cheapening?
Yeah, do you think that there is a sense where your capacity for things like intimacy and interpersonal connection, they're sort of being violated by ultimately consenting to yourself as a product, as a a person who is producing something that historically and for good reasons has been one of the most intimate spaces of human existence, which is our sexuality. Do you think that even if women or men or whoever are producing this with full knowledge and full control over their own product and without any sort of exploitation, do you still feel that there's a sense of there's sort of a reason why we have a sort of shame and embarrassment around these things, because they speak to ourselves on such a fundamental level that it's like almost in a way, by fully accepting a pornographizing of society, for lack of a better term, then it's like we're losing our own capacity to view each other as something almost like mysterious, and not just mysterious, but also as having a capacity towards something greater than just our brute attractiveness that is being marketed to people. So it's like
Like this cat, for instance. Look how mysterious
like
it is.
in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a distinction between like what is erotica and what is pornography. Like so I as an artist, I think about this all the time.
Wait,
but
so you're saying something like, if people are engaging in consuming in sex work, then in their personal lives, they're going to experience less pleasure and meaningfulness around intimacy.
Not just around intimacy, but also just around the way we relate to each other in general, I guess you could say.
He's saying, like, if you take like the fact that interpersonal relationships and sexuality, what have you, is basically like priceless, right? And you literally put a price on it, then does that not cheapen it from having its greater, more ephemeral like qualities? He's saying,
I mean, do you think sexuality didn't have a price on it before?
He's saying, well, no, but he's asking, are you cheapening it by literally making it like a material commodity to buy?
Well, I don't think Aella is cheapening anything. Yeah, she's not cheapening anything.
Well, and not her in particular, because she does fairly well. But I'm saying more broadly, yes. Are you, by making it a literal good you can trade, does that not cheapen the overall?
I think it enhances it. It does the opposite. Makes it more expensive, makes it more valuable, gives it value.
Well,
does it?
If value by what metric? That's the argument.
If I was before, at some point in time, I would have to trade land and dowry and all kinds of other things to give you essentially lifelong, support. And now I can basically pay $40 for an Uber, or like $5.99 a month. Like it's definitely cheapened. Like I don't need to like.
Zero HP has a comment, by the way.
Wait, we'll let Aella finish your point,
okay.
then we'll go to the
yes.
Zero HP. Yeah.
Sorry, I got distracted right before I was going to talk. One, we keep using the word cheapening, and I sort of want to replace it with something more concrete, because it's like sort of like this vague like sense, right? And I want to have something like specific. Like, do we mean that like now I am unable to get a high value mate because I'm doing sex work, and this is what cheapening means? Like now that my like sex or whatever is like less powerful in the actual like relationship marketplace? Like, is that what we mean?
That is one consequence of the cheapening. The cheapening would be that like there used to be like a more instead of sexuality being a priceless like addition to the fact that like you as a person, I have to like make some kind of commitment. By taking it and turning it into a literal commodity, like anything else you would trade, does this cheapen it from this abstract, like more abstract notion, like platonic ideal, and bring it down to like literal discrete qualities? And like it being demoted, I had a lot of cold brew, it being demoted, does that like actually literally cheapen it and make it so that now everyone else also has to suffer from this, right? Like as I just said, like I don't have to take girls on dates, and I could just get a Uber to my apartment if I wanted. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not how it worked. Like
for what? like an Uber, like if you pay them, you could have sex with them. Is that what you're saying?
No, but I'm saying like there used to be a time where I have to like court someone and blah blah blah. Now I can get on an
Or
app
sex
and literally just
and
order you essentially to
Super
come
Iron
over.
Bob, he has a $10 comment. So Super Iron Bob, thank you so much for the donation. He says, how does going on dates and then ghosting from dating sites just for the meal differ in this equation? How does trading a one-night stand for that same meal work?
Interesting.
See, is he agreeing with me or disagreeing? By
I
saying
think
that
he's
there's-
agreeing with you, actually.
I think he's
Super
agreeing
Iron
with me.
Bob.
Yeah, it's lowered it essentially to like $40 worth of like dinner. That's
But like
the market
you
price.
guys are talking about casual sex. Like people still court each other and marry and have long-term investments in each other.
Not really.
But yes,
Comparatively.
It's going
Marriage is down.
significantly.
Marriage is down like 50%. Like let's say the black community. Black community used to have 80% marriage rate, like before crack epidemic, is now down to 20%. 1 in 4 black women get married in their lifetime. Right? If you did it in, I know, but this is the case with literally all communities. The black community is just like 10 years ahead typically with trends, right? So like if that's happening in the black community now, that means in like 10 or so years, Middle America is going to deal with the same exact problem.
This is due to the gender imbalance in the black community because so many are incarcerated, so many men. If you have a whole bunch of women and not
Partially.
a lot of, you're not going to see a lot of marriage because why would a man marry when he can like have sex with a bunch of women? I think we would see this in any community where you remove a percentage of the men.
So if you do that, to bring it back to your earlier point, right, in that apps have created a very liquid market, right, and for the sexual marketplace, and literally like 10% of men are having sex with all the other women. Like 90%
it's
of
gamified
men
relationships to an extent.
So like 90% of
algorithmically.
men are 80. Let's say be charitable. 70% of men are removed from the dating pool, like for viability. So now you've created that same imbalance on the entire sexual marketplace via apps and the liquid market of that. Liquid nature.
Not necessarily. More women reproduce than men, and women are preferred to like have like a smaller percentage of men than men prefer women. This is true, but this is in context for the men that are rejected. Like there's high pressure on the men because if they slip a little bit, they will become one of like the 80% that fail. So the existence of the failures is still important for like the success. Like there's this tension between the two that creates like the like male commitment, for example. Like a man's going to commit because if he doesn't, somebody else is going to step up and take his place. It only happens when you actually like remove men from the equation, from the competition entirely, that you get this type of like family imbalance.
But when you were arguing before for the against side, you brought up the fact that the 80-20 rule statistically is pretty much reality. I mean, I know it's like a meme, like incel meme, whatever. But do you think that in some ways, there has been a lot of negative outcomes, even on like a less tangible level, in terms of the ways in which mass access to pornography at earlier ages has sort of warped the views that men have towards women and vice versa? Even, do you think that there's a negative outcome when, say, a woman who is, I don't know, 15 years old, who their first boyfriend in high school wants them to perform, I don't know, I don't want to go into it, anal sex or whatever, or bondage, or if, the girl that got choked out because of 50 Shades of Grey. Do you think that there's a negative outcome across the board with having a society that doesn't views pornography not as an issue of human intimacy, but rather more of like an economic issue of just like want and need and access and like supply and demand?
Maybe there might be downstream negative ripple effects.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know stats. If you presented me a study that said like exposure to pornography like decreases male long-term satisfaction in a romantic relationship, I wouldn't be like that surprised. I would be surprised if it were like a very significant impact, but I would not be surprised if it were small.
Right. But I think another argument I would ask, or rather I would run by you, would be that when we're talking about, you said you want something more concrete than just cheapening and what we mean by value. I think that the structure in general of the last, I would say, 100 or so years of the way marriage and courtship and relationships happen is decoupled from much older conceptions of belonging within a community, like the Heideggerian notion of community of mortals. Like we are we are thrown in a context, a social context, and we are being towards death, and we have to band together in certain ways. And a lot of these relationships were much more fluid between people within a certain tribe or social arrangement, and therefore there was a lot of impersonal metrics that determined what type of people got together. But now that we have a purely consent-based negative conception of how you go about having sex or having a relationship with someone, that in a way opens the door for this very weird atomized view of the subject that unfortunately the sort of atomic family was the beginning of the end into. The 50s, fucking Leave It to Beaver, Atomic Family, that to me, from my, whatever, base trad reactionary perspective, whatever, to me, that was almost a symptom of this increasing atomization. And so when we're talking about how people pair bond, even to me, the language of pair bonding and consent and so forth, that doesn't really capture the picture of what a healthy sort of relationship within a society could be, because now it's we're just talking about horse trading again. In a strange way, it's this whole thing about bribing each other in dowries and horse trading between men and women. It's almost like a weird postmodern return of that, but we're doing it within the language of liberation. So I think there's, I don't know. Sorry, just stop me. I know this is totally abstract, and I know that you're someone that thinks within concrete framework of statistics and so forth. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of the changes that have happened with an advanced society has caused a whole bunch of damaging effects on culture and community. If that's your point, I do agree with this.
Yeah, but then again.
All right, I'll be right back.
Yeah. Sorry, Lev, you wanted.
I guess it talks more to me about what responsibilities do all of us have as far as the messages that we go that we let out. Because I agree with you, Aella, that people, they are individuals, they are free agents to choose whatever they want to, and I completely agree with you that unless unless you're intentionally mischaracterizing something, tricking somebody into doing something, if you're just laying it out there and saying, this is the reality here, folks, this is what you can get, and this is how you can get it, this is free information available for everybody, and I think that there is nothing wrong with that at all. I am a fan of Sci-Hub, for instance, opening up right now for people to be able to download all these various articles that are, otherwise kept only for the elite few. So I like this kind of stuff. At the same time, when I look at all these different aspects of culture, like back in the 20s, the roaring 20s, we had people who were doing a lot of boozing it up. We had people who were going into the Chinese opium dens, and that was considered to be a standard thing that every hip young person wanted to do. And if we were around that time, would we then say, I am not going to dissuade this person from ingesting the substance because they are a free agent, it's their responsibility. And at that point, what I'm getting to here, Ella, is where exactly is our responsibility as a person, regardless of the free agency of people, to have some system that we can kind of rely on inside of ourselves to tell us what is right and what is wrong, where maybe people can make money from pornography, and if they are beautiful, and you are very beautiful, Aella, by the way, I don't mean to simp, but I just want to say,
Lev,
you are
please
very
don't
attractive
even.
Young. Okay, I'm not gonna get into it right now. But the point is that there are very beautiful people out there who can make a lot of money from this stuff, just as there are people out there who can go out and do drugs and do all kinds of other things. And the question is, what is in each of us the moral responsibility here for, either advocating for it, advocating against it, or being kind of I think Alexander Bard, who we had on, he's an amazing guy, and he's also a very big proponent of sex work, by the way, and he is a BTR regular. We're going to have him on real soon as well, again. But I think his thing is that there are specific people, and I guess he calls them kind of tantric practitioners. There are people out there who are connected to some other world, who he sees as being a lot of the people that you do find within sex work and pornography, people who are outsiders, people who are within this outer rim. And it seems like the way that culture went with the Roaring 20s and booze and drugs, and the way it went in the 60s with psychedelics, a lot of other hard drugs, back then, cocaine, things of that nature. It seems like now things are going that direction, at least as a normie observer. me being the normie in this case, compared to the world that you're in, it seems like something like OnlyFans is also showing itself to be this thing that, if you are beautiful and glamorous, and again, I know you're against trickery, so no trickery. If you are beautiful and glamorous, then you can go in there, make money, and it glamorizes that aspect of it. So again, where do you see the right moral stance to take in this case?
I think that it is not immediately clear. I mean, obviously, like, I don't think that OnlyFans is immoral. I don't think that participating in OnlyFans is immoral. I'm also a moral nihilist, but I still like doing things that make me feel good, and what makes me feel good is often making other people feel good. And so when it comes to like sex work and stuff, I find that often people sort of misjudge the way that other people's minds work. This is really common. And I think that like if you were accurate in what you thought the things other people's minds were doing, then I would probably agree with you a lot more. But like for me specifically, I feel pretty self-aware, and I feel good about it. Like I'm not gonna like sugarcoat it. There are some things I don't like. There are downsides, and there are ways that it have affected my personal life. And I consider it overall to be like one of the best things that's ever happened to me in my life. And
well, you talked about in your guide, I was reading about the tips for women getting into this. So about how it could potentially negatively. So you were very honest about, Sorry, I cut you off. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Right. So like, I mean, you're not like 100% wrong. Like I'm not like, oh, nothing you say is correct. Cause like, yeah, it sucks for some people. Some people get into sex work and then find that like, it's just taking an emotional toll that they really can't handle. And likely those people probably shouldn't be doing sex work. A lot of people don't feel this way. Also, a lot of men are able to consume pornography in a healthy way. I think likely more men than you suspect. I would guess that like we both have like different predictions about how men can pursue it. I do agree that there's like a lot of confusion and rough edges when you like sort of transfer or change culture. So like if you have a whole bunch of people who are used to like a certain type of sexual norm, and then you introduce a different sexual norm, you're going to see a lot of problems for a while until people sort of get used to it and it gets integrated. And I do think that like for communities I've seen that seem to have really integrated sex positivity in like sort of a long-term way, like they've been growing their whole lives in this sort of thing. This is just sort of like a permanent like back fixture for them. They seem to have like, in my personal experience, again, it's not like it's statistically relevant, but they seem to have way fewer psychological issues with it than other people. Also,
wait, what do you mean by communities? Out of curiosity, do you mean like local like communes or just like decentralized people online when you say communities?
Various friend circles I've run into, so like some burner communities, some of the rationalists, some kink communities, a little bit of dancing too. They seem to be, it seems to be like relatively sustainable. I'm saying like it kind of vaguely here. But I have personally experienced like really, really positive relationships that feel like genuinely healthy through and through in sex work. And often I feel like the criticisms of sex work like fail to recognize that sex work is performing like a really important service for a lot of people. And yeah, it has downsides, and also like it is vital. Like I suspect like I have probably helped some people not kill themselves. And like you can't like take that meaning away from me or from like people I know who've had similar experiences.
But don't you think that it's more of an indictment on society in general that certainly certain forms of alienated men are driven towards prostitution and sex work and so forth, that instead of having sort of a healthier social arrangement, that we have to sort of utilize this emotional labor to like, LARP and pretend to be intimate with people. I mean, to me, it just seems kind of alienating, but I mean,
it's not a sex worker's fault that, some men have issues. There are going to always be like unhealthy people out there, and there's always going to be sex workers, and sometimes like the combination thereof is very toxic, but it's not the sex worker's fault.
But sex workers, they've had different sort of, they have a different function. Nice.
Oh, let's take a look. Hold on there.
Yeah, I'll post it in the chat.
It's a little bit
post it.
It's a little bit too digital, bright.
So she can post in the chat. No, I mean, there was throughout history, there were like temple prostitutes and sacred prostitutes and so forth that did have a social function.
Well, sacred is the key word here, though, right? Because there was a certain ritual
But again, this is like a pre-Christian conception of it. So, as for the argument that people are well adjusted in these communities, sorry, go ahead.
Look at that. That is beautiful. Check that out.
Oh, there we go.
Wow.
Nice.
Aella, you got two paintings. You got two paintings in one go. So you got Alexander's beautiful painting, and also my father did that painting of you with the Geo necklace on the cover.
Thank you so much. That's really cool.
You're
and
welcome.
so fast too.
Thank you.
So, but I'm curious to know. I mean, the argument could be that, well, if we were to sort of hard test it with these groups, then it could apply to everybody. But I don't know. I still think that there's something in the pit of the, human soul that creates a lot of these taboos around sexuality for obvious reasons. But I'm curious to know your argument. Why, to you, what is moral nihilism, and how do you not just justify? I mean, the typical argument of like, well, how come you don't do bad things? Blah, blah, blah. I know like why, people don't do bad things. There's a lot of social pressure and so forth. But how have you come to sort of the conclusion of moral nihilism? And how do you think that it is maybe not an ethic, an anti-ethic that can benefit people as someone who is, ostensibly the total opposite of moral nihilist? So I'm very curious. I mean, I don't mean that like in a fucking facetious way. I am generally curious about, well, I just wanted to make that point clear. I'm not trying to irony post here. I am curious how you've gone about that. Sorry, I'm going to shut up now. Sorry.
To start, I seem to behave like very morally. Like if you would measure my behavior, I think that like probably above average, possibly. I tend to be like extremely against things like lying and dishonesty, even when it strongly inconveniences me. And I go out of my way to do things like, return wallets or whatever, even when nobody's looking. So to start, I want to say that I'm not like, although I do sex work, so maybe. maybe
well, we're debate that. So.
But I just want to say that like my view, like when I talk about my views, keep in mind that like this, like I'm not like stabbing people and stealing money or anything. But I don't really experience the sensation of morality at all. Very rarely, occasionally, maybe like once or twice a month, I experience a sense of like a moral thing inside me. And when people talk about like that, I don't really understand. It's like it doesn't tap into something in my head.
Okay, so for example, if you were to do something real shitty to somebody, would you then have something inside of you that just kept you up at night, thinking like, shit, like, why did I do that to this person? Like that kind of, it's almost like a physical feeling, like an ache. I don't know. Is there something similar that you would experience in that case, like if you were to be shitty to somebody?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like empathy for the person if I've hurt them. Like if I hurt somebody, often it will hurt me, and I'll be like, that's painful.
Yeah, there we go.
That's incentive to not hurt someone. That's usually what goes on.
So that's it. That's the morality. I mean, I don't really know
why is that morality?
Because I think that morality is something that through that feeling lets you know if something that you did is, morally.
That's a moral intuitionism, but Aella is saying she doesn't have that. But so if you don't have,
it's like pain and pleasure, basically.
But can you really create maybe not a morality, but an ethics based purely on pain and pleasure? Like that's the old utilitarian sort of bugaboo of like, can pleasure and pain, like this is going back to like fucking the Necromantian ethics, right? Like, can you create a social fabric from just merely the cessation of pain and the pursuit of pleasure?
I'm not trying to create a moral framework. I have none.
Sorry, ethical framework, not moral.
What do you mean by ethics? I'm sorry if that's a dumb question.
God, see, it's one of those things where but then it's like, yeah, I don't it's something that is a codification of behavior as opposed to what we feel as morality in terms of the impulse towards what we conceive of as right and wrong. It's more ethics is sort of like behavior within a society that we've codified, that we've arranged as being acceptable behavior and action and so forth. Whereas morality is something different. Yeah.
Okay, so
Morality
ethics
is something
like
much
what
more.
people agree is acceptable, like social norms.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Ethics are more the codification of social norms and how we exist interpersonally, whereas morality, typically the way people frame it colloquially, is something that is inside and something that we feel is like a conscience weighing upon us. So in a way, you could say that ethics and morality, they are correlated, but they're not like they're sufficient together, but they're not like necessarily together.
Okay. What was the original question?
If you could base an ethical social arrangement purely on this principle that you are a moral nihilist, and not just you're a moralist, but rather you pursue pleasure and avoid pain, like the old Stuart Mill utilitarian metric.
If I had to make rules for people,
yeah, like how can you, from your position as a moral nihilist, create an ethics that is like ostensibly making rules for people? I guess that's a very basic. Yeah.
Well, it would be like trying to figure out what I want, and usually this comes down to stuff like I would like people to have a lot of freedom. That would make me feel good. Like the thought of like entering a society where there's like everybody's like very free, like makes me feel like really great in my body. I like when people are self-exploratory and honest with each other. That makes me feel good. Is this the kind of
how do you define freedom, by the way? I'm really curious about that. How would you define freedom?
Oh, that's a hard one.
It is a hard one, I know.
But also, are you an egoist?
Huh?
No, are you an egoist then? Like you feel that, like you're more of like, within that moral nihilism, you believe in a form of ethical egoism.
What is ethical egoism?
Oh, fuck. It's like sorry, I know it's really I'm flustered, but essentially you believe that your will and your ego has a certain power and you have a right to express your wants and feelings. And I really don't want to, I'm just going to look up the fucking Wikipedia definition. Yeah. But essentially you feel that it's ethical and it's proper behavior to pursue your own interests.
I like pursuing my own interests.
Well, then getting back to the freedom thing, the reason why I ask this is because there was an interesting talk that I was listening to about freedom and what exactly freedom meant at different times. So at certain times, freedom, not only did it mean freedom from, let's say, tyranny, from having somebody's boot on your shoulder or whatever, but it also meant freedom from desire, freedom from, having yourself be cast into, one, grappling for something.
Yeah, this is the basic St. Paul argument that what you think is freedom is actually you're being enslaved to the passions.
Libido dominandi.
Exactly. Yeah, libido dominandi, exactly. Yeah, the E. Michael Jones, like St. Paul argument that you're enslaved to your passions and that sin is a form of inner slavery, even though you think you're free. It's I'm sure, but again, you've heard all of this before, so it's kind of like,
Yeah, I my conception of freedom is basically just I don't think it's like a super coherent concept, but it seems useful. And the positive, negative rights, like people like don't take your stuff and don't like hurt your body. And something I'm not sure that it's fully explored, but I like the idea of property ownership and having rights over your property. Feels good.
But do you think that you come across, and again, I don't mean to be overtly critical, but you come across, you say I'm a moral nihilist, I don't believe in morality, but do you think that reason informs your sense of action and behavior and comportment? Do you think that reason is a basis, or do you believe in more of a total moral nihilism where reason has no part in it? It's just like reason almost justifies our actions. It's not, like Nietzsche said, after a while, when we start to rationalize, we can't tell the difference between what is actual reason and just being a rationalization after the fact. So do you think that reason plays into your conception of how you behave, or reason is just like a way of, I don't know, justifying what you do or what anyone does?
I'm not totally sure. I suspect so. Like a lot of the time, I have like a faint idea of what like might make me feel good, but it takes like a lot of thinking to try and figure out how to get to that point, or like even to uncover what it is to myself that I actually want. And so I use the thinking part of my brain, if that's what you're asking.
So in a way, reason is sort of like a grounding of how you determine what is the best action for you to pursue.
I mean, I pay attention to like my like the felt sense, like in sort of like the back of my head and like down the front of my chest is usually where it is, and it feels like a pulling towards or pushing away. And then if I think of it,
I don't know if Big Yud would approve. I don't think that's very rationalist of you.
That's a Kundalini snake in reverse. It's a Luciferian.
I think Aella's Kundalini is going.
Reverse Kundalini.
Aella,
have you ever had a Kundalini experience?
I don't know. I thought I might have.
Probably. I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever delved into like tantric sex, any of that kind of stuff.
Mm-mm.
No, okay. Well, there's always time. And Verse.
Well, she's going to get an OnlyFans request to do tantric yoga, and so she will have to brush up on her. Apparently, they say the Kama Sutra isn't even canon. It was actually created by.
I'm not the bonk, Geo. You're about to get the bonk, the official.
Yeah, they say the Kama Sutra was created by British colonialists, like Sir Richard Burton. It actually wasn't a real Hindu text, but I don't know if that's true.
No. It was a real Hindu text. Yeah.
Okay. But the way it was interpreted was by prolific colonialist perverts like Richard Burton going and having sex with beautiful women around the world.
They left out a lot of things, according to this wonderful Hindu girl who I know. They left out a lot of things having to do with just forming your life properly, like certain traditions that you should occupy your time with.
Was she a Brahmin, Lev? Was she a Brahmin?
Yes, all that.
Oh, dude! How did I know that? How did I know that, Lev? How did I know that?
Yes, her grandfather was a Pandit. Her grandfather was a Pandit.
Oh, even better, better.
Yes, but anyway, the idea here is that in the Kama Sutra, it's supposed to talk about just like how do you base your whole life around like how do you have relationships, how do you have sex, but beyond sex, just like how do you go about living in a married life. And so I think that there is a thirst out there for wisdom. Not even a thirst. I'd say there is an ignorance of wisdom. People don't really like to listen to the wisdom of their elders, especially today. You know, it's like from that Clockwork Orange trope with the bum. He's talking about, men on the moon, men spinning around the earth, and there's no attention paid to earthly law and order no more. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the Clockwork Orange thing. The point is that, he says it lets the old get out of the young. Never mind. Anyway, Verse. You're back, and I would love to hear your also opinions of what we just talked about right now.
About being slaves to your libidinal drives.
Yeah.
And that, the compulsion towards pornography is more, shackle than it is some kind of liberation. But yeah, I mean, there's that. But then more since we have like more than just like being a dude on the internet and seeing porn all the time, like there is a parasocial nature to the whole OnlyFans and pornography thing that kind of also I think contributes to like alienation in society. So, and also of course, like if I'm trying to be like more global in my thinking, there's also like the whole not OnlyFans particularly, but like online pornography like facilitates sex trafficking on a large scale, and a lot of other major issues. So it's like, not that I'm on a moral high horse, but also like, I don't think it's particularly beneficial to society. But that's where me trying to be like respectful. That's how I will describe it. That's my point. Yeah. I'm not long-winded. But Zero did ask, and he did request.
We totally forgot about Zero.
Yes,
to say Zero. The Lord's Prayer. He requested to say the Lord's Prayer. Like, what would that go for on your OnlyFans, Aella?
You must
If
have
you-
missed my Christian streams.
Yeah,
You
could
had
do
Christian
you could do like
streams?
Psalms. You could do Psalms 23 if you want. Like I think
Yeah.
he's a little bit. I think he has
Wait, no. Unironically, you had. Oh my. Oh.
There's
Yeah, I
only-
would do
there's-
things
all right.
because I mean, I used to be very religious, and
Oh,
I
God.
memorized over 800 verses of the Bible. And so what I
Same.
would do is I would
Nice.
dress like the way I used to, and then like pretend that I was not supposed to be.
That's not nice.
I was to witness. I came here to
Blasphemy.
witness to the people on the live stream. But in order to do that, I had to obey the rules of this site, and the rules are that if somebody tips me, I have to take my clothes off, and I got very upset about it.
Were you evangelical growing up? Or Mormon?
Yeah,
What was your evangelical? Nice. Some 10 revivals and
Well,
stuff.
as a
Same.
good Italian Catholic, I have on my cross, my grandfather's cross, my cornicello to help to ward against the evil spirits that I am subjecting myself. No, I'm kidding. I'm only partially
two
kidding.
sides of a
but-
similar coin here, with the evangelical upbringing, and then the base path and the cringe path, like of the Force, have split.
But I feel, but this
upbringing.
is, but again, I think this is the problem I feel with like
What's the problem?
American like biblical literalism and like evangelical stuff, because they don't have like the sort of necessary Lindy hard tested
Yeah, they do.
approaches to
It's literally
no.
the most long-standing book in the
No, but
Western canon.
as opposed to Roman Catholicism or Orthodoxy, they don't have this sort of like middle way approach to human sexuality. Depending on who you ask, but it just seems like, I don't know, for some reason American Protestantism has become a fedora factory, or rather evangelicalism has become like a fedora factory, and I don't know, there's got to be something there. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I lived in North Carolina, and a lot of the Protestant girls there were, just fine. I think it kind of depends on your upbringing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like the strict how strict and Calvinist your family were, or what have you.
But then, but Aella, do you think like I know this is kind of like a stupid question. Do you feel that like there's like people that are critical of you, they say that like you're still in that like teen angst rebellious phase against your upbringing? Like do you get that criticism a lot, and what do you think of?
Yeah, people often be like, "Oh, it was just like rebelling against, being strict upbringing, or she just like hates her dad and is trying to get back at him." Like, I get that stuff all the time.
Is it true though? That's the question.
Oh no!
I mean, if
That's a legitimate
he's
question.
making bank at it.
Yeah, you can make bank, but
This
the
is
question
what
is whether or not
everyone
it's
wants
real.
to know in the chat. Yes, is it true? Oh my!
It's okay if
I
that's
don't
the
think
case.
so.
I think.
So
No?
one, like based on introspection, I don't think this is true, and I've admitted a lot more like unflattering things to myself. And secondly, the timeline doesn't quite line up. After I left home and was doing like a lot of processing and stuff, I still was extremely morally upstanding, as you might think, for quite a while after that. And it only was like after periods of financial hardship where I decided to finally try sex work, and it was not a first resort, and it was like quite some time after I had parted ways with my dad.
Interesting.
So then you would consider yourself like a sex positive feminist?
I don't know if I would consider myself a feminist.
Oh,
Okay.
I like this.
That's interesting.
I like women's rights.
Why you
But
like women's rights,
feminism
but
means a
not
lot.
feminism?
Huh?
No, just I was clarifying. You say you like women's rights, but you're not pro-feminism.
Well, so it depends on what you mean by feminism. Means a lot of things, and a lot of them I'm very behind. I agree with a lot. And it also means some other things that I don't agree with. And so if you're thinking a specific thing by feminism, like I may adhere to that and I may not.
Mm-hmm. Like if you were if in your own terms, because I don't want to like put words in your mouth. What would you How would you qualify your views on the matter?
I think
Like
women's rights
and the
is
feminists, like you're split from. How do you differ from feminism? Okay.
So like
Oh, that's it.
I was making a lot of arguments against women's rights, and I think women absolutely should have rights. I was treated very poorly as a woman growing up, and I have like a personal, strong, like emotional, like understanding of what it means to be treated poorly because I'm a woman. Like explicitly told that I was less intelligent and I was supposed to be submissive, and like I'm not good at taking risks. Like, I can't think clearly because I'm like that stuff sucks. I know what that's like.
I got you.
Right. So I don't mean to be like not deeply empathetic to that, because I can still feel it in me, the grief from it. But also,
if
like
you don't
another
mind me asking,
discussion.
who were the people that were doing it? Was it like authority figures, like people within your community, like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was homeschooled, and all of the other people that I knew were in like basically an identical community to me. So, and our media was filtered. So I didn't really have significant exposure to another way of being.
So you
Okay,
had
okay.
internet, but the sites were all, specially selected for you,
We
basically.
had restrictions placed on the websites you could access. Yeah.
Interesting. I was also homeschooled, by the way, so there we go. But no, my experience was very different. But
Yeah,
we
but
did
you could
use.
argue that it was a good outcome, though. I mean, Aella is very successful and popular, and Lev, you were successful and popular, so you could say the
Oh,
homeschooling was actually good.
yeah. Well, I used
I mean,
Bob.
statistically,
I
it is. I
used
mean, but
Bob Jones University. Was that what you guys used or no? That was like the
No.
homeschool program for like Christian fundamentalists, and we were not Christian
Nice.
fundamentalists, but that was just the thing that we happened to see there. But no, it is interesting. I see similarities. Like I was talking before the stream started about growing up in Russia. Well, growing up, I was like 4 years old when I came here to America. But the kind of stuff that my parents went through, like my dad went through, my mom went through, like there was a lot of, especially like for women in Russia, like my I think it was like great grandmother. She grew up at 15. She married this older Jewish guy, and this is like in a small shtetl, like in those Jewish villages in the
Shtetl, yeah.
shtetl
I
villages
love it when
back
Bronze
in the
Age pervert says Shtetlberg. I love when he says
Shtetlberg.
Yes.
So
Yes. Hello.
yes, so
it. Yes,
and
hello.
so he was like a very religious guy, and I think he laid a hand on her as well. Back then, he was much older than her, and despite that, like she was an incredibly kind person, and she was always welcoming to everyone. And so even an example like that, like when I see people advocating for the great chain of being and the man above the woman and all that, it's like it to me it's bullshit, just because it's not bullshit that, let's say, there should be like certain people who are, let's say, guiding lights of the family if they deserve it. But a lot of people don't deserve that shit. A lot of people who are just going to be brutes and who are just going to beat the fuck out of you, they don't deserve that place. They're closer to the beasts of the field as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know, like when it comes to something like that, how can we balance the need that other people, let's say, who are not the biggest Aella girl fans, how do we balance the need that they see of wanting there to be more order in the world, wanting there to be like less of this disintegration, everybody doing their own thing, which would cause, as they see it, chaos, which would cause, as they see it, entropy over time. I don't know what better word here, Aella, to use in this. I'm just trying to make an example of like disorder, complete chaos. This is how they see things going down right now. And I could see some legitimacy in that. So how do we balance that out with at the same time not creating these beast people that beat their kids, that beat their wives, and just make a hell on earth for people like it was for you when you were living in that environment?
Yeah, it's extremely hard. There's like a lot of factors. So a lot of the chaos we're seeing isn't just out of nowhere. It's due to reasons. Like we're seeing a giant cultural shift in the last 100 years or so. And it's not just because like the culture decided it got bored and decided to have a shift. No, it's like there's like concrete reasons why people are acting the way they are. And I often find like in judgment of the way people are acting, it's sort of like this implication like, well, you should go back to before. I'm like, well, you're ignoring like the whole chain of events that got us here. Like we can't go back to before for the same reason we're here in the first place. And I think that there's a lot of issues with where we are now. But the answer is not returning to the past. The answer is like figuring out a new way to move forward. Like we have to like integrate what's going on. Like I think women should have rights. And I do think that women vote for things I disagree with. And we should figure out a way to like give women agency and freedom, and also manage to have like actual, like to have like general freedom in the culture too. Like we need to find a totally new like frame that like neither like the traditional feminist approach nor like the super trad approach is going to be able to do for us.
Well, I think well, go ahead, Verse.
Oh,
You
no,
had a
no.
point. No,
I mean, my point was that I think that we kind of miscategorize the past.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think we can return because you can't put the genie back in the bottle. But I
No,
will say that
exactly.
it's miscategorized. Like, it doesn't make sense. The whole argument that like all the men were beating their wives doesn't literally. There's no grounding for that. It doesn't.
Yeah,
make
and I
any
was not making that
logical sense.
argument. Just
No, I know,
just
I
to
know,
be clear.
I know what you are. But I think that like we should acknowledge a lot of the reason why we've moved in this atomized direction. Things like
exactly.
Bernays and various, the Tavistock Institute and various different like think tanks that like kind of deliberately atomized us in order to
but also
generate more capital. But
yeah, exactly. And Verse is right. And also, like, you can see this, my position on the political right is, when it comes to the contemporary art world, I always have to defend my love of certain artworks, and to say that, like, to examine the conditions. And actually, he's in the chat, but everyone should go and see Zero HP Lovecraft's interview with my good friend Alex Kashuda, who is also a woman, by the way. I do not hate women. I am friends with Alexandra, friends with Default Friend. Anyways,
I like Default Friend, and Alex was on my podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They were both great podcasts. Versus Versions podcast, who I also was on his podcast.
True.
So Zero HP Lovecraft, he brought up this point about the misconception is
radical eugenics.
Yeah, radical eugenics. The misconception is that when it comes to traditionalism itself, the way it's framed is like a very like modernist concept. Shut up, Jules. Yes, I do know women. Fuck you. No, I'm kidding. I know. It's like I got a black. Well, Verse is my black friend. So he was saying how tradition itself is like a modernist concept because our ancestors did not conceive of themselves as traditional. But I would say that within traditionalism proper, in terms of as a philosophy, rather than the conception by which, we have to go back to when women were chattel or whatever, like where men were. But then again, men, they had to establish themselves and create their own value in a traditional framework as well. But I would say that within the tradition as a philosophy, as a way of approaching the sort of fall into modernity, I would say that implies itself a form of futurism in a way that, it's an impossibility to truly go back to the past and view reality the way that our ancestors did. But that being said, I feel like, Aella, you're kind of a bit close, we're worlds apart, but like closer to what would be an authentic form of not completely a return, because returning, that is just a worship of ashes. That is not a preservation of a flame. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Zero HP, I do have binders full of women, but they're art references. Don't get any ideas. It's purely just because it's for my artistic practice. So don't worry about it. God.
Let me save my thought. But anyway, tradition's not the preservation of ash, or not the worship of ash, just preservation of fire, or whichever direction you say that in. But yeah, we can't move forward without taking the Lindy concepts that have sustained humanity through the aeons. If we ignore all of them because of like exceptions to the rule, that we're not really doing better. Like I would say, even Aella, would you say it's fair for me to say that you wouldn't say your lifestyle is for everybody? Like it's more of the exception than it is the rule? Is that a fair assumption on my part?
I think most people would be unhappy doing sex work.
Yes. So, and to my greater point, is not so much that persons of this, whatever shouldn't exist. It's more of like it's promoted at a scale that is not only unnatural, it's also detrimental to society. Like if I go on TikTok and I see girls getting groomed because of whatever, because they have the potential to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's like literally evil. You know what I mean? Like there's some things that are just like wrong, right? That one's one of them, right? Whereas like that's not to say that like an adult can't make decisions regardless of if I agree with them. But I feel as if the liberation.
If you're underage, like you legally, like.
I mean, can girls go to bars if they're underage? Like they drink underage, kids do drugs underage, they get fake IDs. They like these people can still do it. They do often do it.
OnlyFans once promoted an underage
camera on their Twitter, and they got called out for it. But she was like, she started when she was 17.
Yeah, and this is a common. This is actually fairly common.
I'm not sure how common it is. I mean, I don't want to go Reddit here and say, well, what are the statistics? But at the same time,
there was that Adam
Yes.
Explains Things video where he's like, actually, sex addiction isn't real.
No, but I do want to. But I do want to take a look more at like what is fanning the flames of, for example, when you do have posts. And I know we had a friend of ours, a great friend of the show, who she turned I think she turned 18 long ago, but then she had a post that she did where she kind of like pretended to say that oh my god, I turned 18 now, I'm gonna get my OnlyFans, and her OnlyFans was just like her like cooking or like doing the laundry.
It was a troll.
Yeah, but the idea here though is that there are examples, I'm sure, I just don't remember the specific ones, of girls turning 18 and then like rushing in to get their OnlyFans. So to me that is more of an example of this like this fanning of the flames type of thing, which again goes to my original question, which I think, Aella, you answered, as far as you wouldn't encourage sex work in general. So then the question is of like, how would you then go about just talking about it, even just like, here I am, this is what I do? Because you could talk about it in terms of how much money you can make from this, but basically what I'm trying to say here is, would it be worth it to have a disclaimer which would say like, this is, all these bad things are possible to happen. You really have to make sure like you 100% want to do this. Just like really try to emphasize. I don't know.
Well, really, what would be your ideal society in terms of the issue of sex work in general? What is your utopia?
I do put disclaimers on my guide to cam girls. I multiple times throughout the article talked about the negatives. And part of like the point of it was trying to help people evaluate whether or not this is something that they want to do. And I don't have any sense that I was trying to hold back information or like sway people. I was being as actually honest as I could. And I think that's good. I would like more conversations about sex work to like be genuine about it. I feel like I haven't seen like a ton of glamorizing it. I'm in a lot of communities. I regularly read cultures like that I don't ascribe to. I'm subscribed to like 600 subreddits and a whole bunch of Facebook groups from things I don't agree with. And from across the spectrum, all different kinds. And I haven't really gotten the impression that OnlyFans is glorified in a way that sort of obscures the downsides really almost at all. If anything, it might be the reverse, based on what I've seen.
It could be seeing different things. I mean,
there is like monthly like posts that get like numbers where they say like, I started OnlyFans at 19. Now I have a down payment on like this McMansion that the company probably bought.
Tons of videos on TikTok, on YouTube.
From sex workers. Like a lot of the glorification. Yeah, so I agree that this is true. If you look at sex workers who are doing well on OnlyFans, they're going to talk about how they're doing well on OnlyFans. They also can't talk about the downsides. Like, it's not sexy and it's not going to increase your income to be like, wow, this guy, my highest tipper, is fucking pissing me off right now, and I'm having trouble like sleeping because I'm worried that maybe he's not going to stop tipping me. Like you can't say that shit. At all. But
doesn't that counteract the argument, because you have to like put on a face, almost like a social like persona, in order to do this type of work? And do you feel that in a way that you can't express any sort of vulnerability? It's like, it's like those ASMR, I know verse, I say it ASMR girlfriend experience, where it's all about this.
I wasn't gonna Reddit you, don't worry.
Yeah, where it's like this girlfriend immersion experience where she's like laying in bed and it's like she's patting your head and shit and she's pretending to love you. Like, don't you feel that in a way of your own self, you have to put on this persona in a way that's not, it's not merely that, like, everyone puts on a persona, everyone does, exactly. There's a theater, there's erotica, there's the erotic arts, but do you feel that like when you're playing to the fetish of like certain men that want you to act in a certain way, do you feel like in a way that's not like a artistic expression, but rather that's like a persona that is merely for a benefit of someone else, that maybe you get some financial incentive to it. But I don't know. It's just, I don't know how to describe it.
Like, do you think I use this like straight autist face when I'm like live streaming as a sex worker?
I didn't say it. You did. I didn't say it. But,
somebody's a chat respecter, I guess.
ZHP said that my oratory style is like Penn Jillette, but cat.
I think that's
I love
accurate.
that. I actually do kind of look like Penn Jillette, but
You do look like Penn Jillette.
yeah, before his weight loss, obviously.
Now,
neither here nor there.
yeah, I don't think it's I don't think that you in particular, Aella, do obscure.
No, ale is quite
the
vanilla. Not that I would know
potential
though, but
downsides.
it's.
I will give you that.
yeah, no
I said,
fursuits
like,
here.
obscuring the like.
No, Lev, did you immediately
like,
go to the fucking
obfuscate, like the downsides of profession? Now, so I will be charitable in that sense. I do, however, think that there is a like phrasing. I feel like there's a the conversation of like the very highly permissive, like not just you in particular, but of like sexual permissiveness and like poly and whatever. I think a lot of people get sucked into it, even people who are otherwise smart, like, and they find themselves constantly like ruining relationships. Like, for example, like I mean, I know personally people who are poly, for example, or like you see tons of like Reddit posts of people like doing like, oh, I ruined my marriage or whatever, because people want to try these new things, but again, also realize you can't put genie back in the bottle once you open Pandora's box.
We're switching to the poly issue now.
But like, no, I mean, like, it's all the same thing. It's all one and the same. It's like, oh, we're
this
in,
open
we're in this
view of
postmodern,
human
like, everything.
Yeah.
Let's all try different new configurations of everything, even though we know what works from 50,000 years of humanity. We know generally what works. We've done the same thing as an animal for.
But Aella's argument is that
societies.
sex work is also Lindy, so that's kind of like.
Yeah, it's not like people
I mean, that's always an
being committed to their partners is a thing.
But in a way, it's kind of interesting if we think back to the sex work of old. If we're talking about like the temple prostitutes back then, there was some kind of system that they were under, and I wonder how retirement worked, because that's one part that we didn't really talk about here. Retirement, getting old, what happens then? Because let's say even in the polyamorous situation, I always found it weird, and I was asking Jules this before, because Jules, he was into polyamory, and he's still a polyamory, respecter from what I understand. Respecter, yeah.
Polyamory respecter.
When it comes to, let's say, you're in a polyamorous relationship, and then you get old, are you going to be able to have this quality of, let's say, when you're like, when you're feeling sick, who's going to hold the bucket for you, to throw up in, or who's going to, pardon, where I'm going with this, but who's going to like wipe your butt, when you're not able to do so anymore? You know what I mean? Like,
well, you'd have a community of people, Lev. The polycule would act as, and ZHP brought up, prostitution is Lindy, but online streaming pornography is not Lindy. It's a uniquely modern phenomenon.
True.
So I wonder.
But no, I mean, I think it is a serious consideration as far as anybody's entire life, because people do sometimes live lives of like blooming quickly like a beautiful, fiery rose, and then just, that's also a life that people choose to go through. But then as far as the long-term plan here for anybody who wants to pursue a career in sex work, what would be then like the last rounds of the game of life, so to speak? Like, what would be the optimal way for people to go about it? And could people still end up, like, let's say at an older age, maybe they could still end up having a relationship with somebody, meeting somebody?
Lev, come on, Lev, listen, Lev. The hottest commodity right now is MILF porn. You know this, right? So
yes,
that's
I did not. I wanted to kind of back away from that aspect of it, but yes, there is MILF porn too. But at a certain point, like, how old can you get before? I don't know.
Oh, man. Don't ask that question. You do not want to know the answer, Lev.
Yes.
So it's
but still, I mean, Aella, I think this is a serious question here as far as what is the long-term plan in general from a lot of the people who you've spoken with who are within the industry.
a lot of people who get into sex work did it because they didn't have other good financial options. You don't have a lot of people dropping out of being a lawyer to be a sex worker. So these people aren't exactly giving up careers in something that is going to be blossoming. These are people who are like maybe if they had pursued a normal life would end up like a middle manager at Whole Foods because they worked there for 30 years. So if you do sex work for a very long time and then stop, most of the people who are stopping like aren't really missing out on that much. Their options really weren't that good anyway. The people who do very well in sex work tend to be more business oriented, more driven. Like a lot of the people who are making the most money on OnlyFans like are really good at marketing. And at that point, once you quit sex work, you have the skills to be able to build your own business elsewhere. Like for example,
so every sex worker should probably take a community college business course. They want
that
to
would also be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also saving for retirement. If you're a successful sex worker, you can probably retire before you get too old. Never have to work again.
But don't you think, I mean, do you feel that the sort of well, two things come to mind. One is have you ever heard of the book the textbook Smut? Have you ever heard of this book?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's a like a university level, like I was taught this, I had when I was a philosophy grad. It's about the difference between like it's like basically this guy, he was like a student of Sartre, and he was talking about the different conceptions of how people view eroticism and sexuality and the lines between it. And he had a few different models. One of them was what he called, I believe he called it the evangelical model, where sexuality is something that invades the subject and it blurs the lines between like what is my true self and what is a release into a terrifying openness. And then he had like the libertarian model, which, I mean, the book has been criticized, but it's generally a good book, I feel, that gets at the core of what people think and feel about sexuality. Like, so someone as yourself, as opposed to someone like me or Verse, it's like we have almost like there's a chasm between how we view the human subject itself, and it strongly correlates to how we relate to our own selves, our own bodies, and he goes into this like Sartrean distinction between what is authenticity and like crafting yourself in terms of like erogenous zones and so forth. So that comes to mind, like the different approaches to being. But also I would say, like, what do you feel about this? You were talking about long-term career plans as a sex worker. What do you feel about like the old school, like Naomi Klein beauty standard argument, that it's sort of like wrong of like placing the standard upon
myself
people?
Behave yourself
Please.
myself.
No
I let you in here because you know, this is a privilege, not a right over here.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
But anyways, what do you feel about like the Naomi Klein beauty standards argument, that it's sort of like wrong to like you know, these young women that go into sex work, they're expected to look a certain way, and it's like they only have like a very quick shelf, like quote unquote shelf life to like what they're doing. Like, what do you feel that that's like being challenged nowadays, that people want more niche? Like, I remember it came up in your interview, like people want more niche forms of porn. They don't necessarily want like the porn star, like, you know, gratuitous, like grunting, moaning, violation. They want something that's like more like paraphilic in a way. They want something more personalized. So I don't know, what do you think of like the feminist beauty standard argument?
But before I answer, I want to say I need to go pretty soon. So after I answer,
okay, yeah, no problem.
I don't know. I don't know if male like preferences in porn have changed over time. I would guess that they haven't significantly. I bet that like the kind of things that men like now are about the kind of things that they liked 20 years ago, except for maybe incest porn. I don't know if that's a quirk of search or what.
That is one of the most popular searches. It's growing. Yeah.
Right. I there's like a specific thing that men like, and it's like a 19-year-old girl with like a medium, slightly large breasts who looks super young and just like desperately wants to suck your dick and has thin thighs. Like you look like that, and you know men are going to give you a whole bunch of money.
Girl next door look.
Right, girl next door.
But that's what I mean. Like, you don't, for example, like yourself, you don't look like the typical, like stereotypical 80s porn bimbo. Like, you have you got more of the girl next door brunette vibe going. Like maybe there's something to be said about that. I don't know. I'm getting into trouble now. I'll shut up. So.
Right, it's intentional. Like I've never gotten tattoos, and I have never had a different hair color, and it's long. I know what's marketable, and I do that.
And you know what else is marketable? It is marketable to say to everybody that you must subscribe right now. For all the people in their goon caves, we welcome you.
There is a few gooners, actually, we know for a fact.
Yes, we welcome you, all the beautiful gooners out there. Come to BTR, come on our stream. Come to the stream if you want. I don't care. The point is that you are out there.
Everyone, come right now.
God. Are you coming yet?
My work.
Are you coming? We all
Here, I'll do some asthma sounds for you. No.
Yeah. So guys, this has been a great stream. Aella, I really appreciate you spending time with us talking about this stuff. I mean, look, I'll be honest. There was a lot of fucking haters out there on Twitter, and I don't get it because you are a wonderful person. I mean, whatever differences of opinion,
no, kidding.
Whatever difference of opinion we happen to have, I honestly don't fucking think it's even that much because I see.
Well, what did you think of this stream, Aella? Do you think you'd come again or?
I really like the reverse debate format. I'm sort of like sick of podcasts where I get it's still fun. Like, don't get me wrong, but like I'm starting to be interested in something more experimental. And I like the challenge of having to think about like an argument that I don't typically make or necessarily agree with. So that was great. That's what got me on here. If there were more reverse debates in that sort of format.
We're gonna have them definitely. We're gonna have one about democracy soon coming up.
That'll be fun.
Yes.
And just for my own self-serving interest, do you think that your fans would be cool? Like I can unlock my account now. They're not going to brigade me. Have I been respectful? Like hopefully.
I think you'll be fine.
Okay, good.
I mean,
So yes, what'd you say?
Some of my fans suck and some are great. So
okay.
It's a mixed bag.
So to all the Aella fans, please, I respect women. I do not hate women. I have a problem with the rates-based model. That was probably my point. I respect women, love women.
We respect you too, Gio.
Thank you. I am not a hideous, misogynistic incel. I only pretend to be one, so it's so cool.
You only play one on TV.
I only play one on the internet. So
yes,
it's been fun. It's been like I mean, I think we are worlds apart. But I feel like it's been a very enriching experience. It's made me think about from the other perspective, the arguments that one could bring up against, a lot of the red pill manosphere stuff. I think
this is what we do. This is what BTR Break the Rules does. BreakTheRules.tv. Subscribe to us right now. We are also on Captivate.fm if you want to listen to an audio version of this. And by the way, patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron right fucking now. Become a patron because you are going to get so many goodies for all the new people who are watching this, for all the simps out there. Simp us. Simp Break the Rules, because when you simp Break the Rules, what you get? $5 membership, BTR Percolator, you get access to secret Discord. $20 membership, you get access to beautiful magnets that my father creates, really well-crafted beautiful magnets. $30 membership gets you Geo's beautiful prints from the TFW No GF series. $50 gives you all of the above, plus a painting from Geo, custom painting, plus Jules creating the paint for the figures from that. I can never
yes,
say
please, someone clip that thing, share it on Twitter. The clip where I say I respect women. Yes, please do that.
Yes, and lastly, a completely custom wooden magnet. So if you want a wooden magnet of Aella's head, we will make a wooden magnet out of Aella's head. It all depends on you. It all depends on what you want.
$50 you get. Jules will paint you a Warhammer 40K figure. But also another thing we don't mention is that any one of the banner images that we use that is created by Lev's father and Lev himself, we can give you a poster print at the $50 level of your choice. Right. So if you want the Aella portrait, I will. Lev will send you one at the $50 tier, and I will also give you one of my Bob Ross paintings that I do. These like little Bob Ross sketches at the $50 tier, as well as all the other Patreon things. So I will give you a woodblock print of one of the 5 that I pick at random. I have 5 woodblocks that I've done at the TFW No GF series. It's basically just I did these woodblocks of Wojak hugging each other and stuff. So yeah,
they are incredibly beautiful. In fact, let me just quickly right now. Hold on, where is this? Fucking thing. Hold on. I'm trying to find these prints. Okay, here are the magnets, just real quick. Here's what the magnets look like. And next I'm going to go to the prints.
The chat, you guys can see it, but we can't see it in the chat, unfortunately.
Yeah, you can't see it on the chat. And here are the Patreon prints. Here are the TFW No GF series prints. And they are very beautiful, very exquisite. Trust me, Aella, you want one of these prints. I guarantee it.
Actually, I could send Aella one.
There we go. That's like the drug dealer giving a free sample. Good move. All right, guys, this is it. This is the end of the stream. Aella, I appreciate so much you being here. This has been fantastic conversation. I think we learned a lot from each other, as we always do, because this is what Break the Rules does. Guys, please follow Aella on Twitter. This is her Twitter account over here. And, okay, that's Sushi Bar, thank goodness, because somebody posted porn on Sushi Bar right now, and I was afraid they did it in the chat. Whew. Man, that's a load off my... Okay, so follow Aella, follow Porco Writes Again. I don't know, is your
Porco Rosso from the Ghibli.
Yes, Porco Rosso, I'm going to put that in right now.
And subscribe to my YouTube website forthcoming. And I feel, like, just to be totally fair to Aella, God, I don't know why I'm saying this. Just to be, because we always promote people that come on the show. So go and buy Alexander's prints.
Yes.
Please go. I can't believe I'm saying this. Go and subscribe to Aella's OnlyFans. Please.
I'm more interested in the board game thing. I want to hear a little bit about that.
And do not clip me saying go and subscribe to Aella's OnlyFans. But please, unironically, I mean, she's been kind enough to go on the show. And Lev, if you could, can find a link to Aella's OnlyFans, drop it in the chat.
Aella did some like game thing, the board game thing, didn't you? Is that
okay?
Am I right about that? Talk about that. You should plug that instead of the OnlyFans.
Well, here's the OnlyFans.
But
you did a board game.
We're currently out of stock, however. It's a card game.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Oh,
nice.
We should talk about that so you get like pre-orders and stuff when you go back, because that's something that looks interesting. I like the idea of that.
And lastly, by the way, here is the Discord. Guys, go to our Discord right now. If you are not on Discord, go to Discord. Break the Rules Discord. We are growing. We got to grow before Microsoft buys Discord. You know, we got to grow and then move people.
Oh, by the way, tomorrow I'm going to drop a new painting video on my YouTube channel, Giant Productions. Yeah, I'm going to drop a new painting video. It's going to be from my series I'm doing for Man's World magazine. It's a little shorter than the last one. And I also have a woodblock printing video I'm going to release where I have my Frank Hassel insulin pump GoPro kit.
Nice.
Where I'm doing it. So I just have to edit that. It's going to be a murder to fucking edit.
All right, guys, this is it. This is the end of the stream. I love you very much.
Thank you for Aella for coming on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. This was really fun.
Mwah. Take care. Good night, everybody.